All right, here we go. Ultimate try not to rage challenge here. Let's do this. Senate confirmation gotta look good.
As the commander of Inspiration,
here we go.
First all-civilian spaceflight, and the first private citizen to walk in space. He knows that every successful mission depends on the skills and the dedication of its crew, as well as the countless professionals supporting them from the ground. Mr. Isaacman, I know that you are as committed to American supremacy in the final frontier as is this committee and the entire Senate. The United States must remain the unquestioned leader in space exploration. And this imperative is why we need to confirm your nomination as expeditiously as possible. My hope is that you will be confirmed and in this role before the end of this year. Finally, a word about our nominee to lead industry and analysis within the International Trade Administration at the Department of Commerce. If confirmed, Stephen Haynes will also help us compete with China. He will support U.S. companies with actionable market intelligence, help them navigate trade barriers, and identify opportunities for expansion into foreign markets. He brings experience as a Foreign Service officer and from across multiple federal agencies. Both our nominees before us will advance American interests, whether in outer space or here at home. I now turn to Ranking Member Cantwell for her opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for this hearing. Congratulations, Mr. Isaacman, on being renominated to lead NASA, and Mr. Haynes on your nomination to be Assistant Secretary of Commerce. I, too, would like to welcome our colleague, Senator Britt, from a state that has a very robust aerospace community, and look forward to continuing to work with her. And I'd like to say a special welcome to two Washingtonians who are here, Bill Nye, the science guy from Washington, and Mr. Dietrich, who is Mr. Haynes' father-in-law. Great to have you here as well in support of him. Mr. Isaacman, I supported your nomination the first time you came before the committee, and I hope to do so again. I, as the chairman mentioned, hope to get you in this position before the end of the year. But there is no secret that a lot of NASA changes have been made since the last time you were before this committee, including the NASA decision to recompete for the lunar lander, the release of the president's proposed NASA budget, which calls for cutting the agency's budget by nearly a quarter in the workforce, and nearly a third of the science funding cut in half. So given all that, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're here to answer questions about NASA's future. And I hope that today's hearing will show that there's bipartisan agreement, strong bipartisan agreement, that we must redouble our efforts to get American astronauts back to the surface of the moon as soon as possible. At our committee hearing in November, we heard concerning testimony from several expert witnesses who left little room for doubt that the current SpaceX lunar lander would not be ready to put Americans back on the moon either in 2027 or 2028. And this is almost certainly would lose the race to China. And I know that you are going to have robust competition. In response, the acting administrator, Duffy, reopened the contract and its competition for the lunar lander that can be ready sooner by the end of 2028. And I think this was the correct decision, and I expect you to continue executing on this plan if confirmed. To be clear, winning the race to the moon is not just about short-term token victories. It is the first step in accomplishing a very long-term presence on the lunar surface, which is strategic economically and in a national security imperative. Mr. Isaacman, I expect to hear from you today about how you will ensure we achieve these goals. NASA is also much more than just a moon exploration program. The agency leads in a number of other vital strategic missions, including aeronautic research, space technology, and of course the agency's critical science mission. NASA is one of the world's leading research and development organizations. I think that's why we have, I don't know, about 50 people waiting outside to get in this hearing room. I think they really believe you're going to get confirmed, and they all want to be first in line to talk about all these developments. NASA is one of the leading research and development organization and agency that feeds a multiple of sectors of innovation, including AI, quantum, advanced aerospace materials, and manufacturing and aviation safety. You and I have had a chance to talk about this issue as it relates to in my home state, 1,500 companies from a robust aerospace supply chain, including 40 Artemis program suppliers, and this issue of a tech hub working on next-generation thermoplastics that is so critical to all space and aerospace manufacturing to get a high-rate piece manufacturing production. Nevertheless, as we discuss these issues, OMB Director Vaught has been working to gut NASA's budget, especially in science. Earlier this year, multiple NASA whistleblowers provided evidence showing that OMB was pushing NASA to implement the dangerous cuts requested in the president's budget for fiscal year 2026, disregarding the law and the impacts that this would leave on NASA. This is just unacceptable. Mr. Isaacson, if confirmed, I expect you will push back on these dangerous ideas and advocate for NASA's budget. I also invite you to visit Washington State. We'd love to continue this discussion on how to generate the next aviation innovation. It's clear that there's a lot going on that will help us on the Moon to Mars mission, not just the 40 Artemis suppliers, but a lot of other issues in how to guarantee our satellite communication for the future and how to make sure that is secure. So thank you again for your willingness to step up to these challenges. Turning to you, Mr. Haynes, have confirmed the Assistant Secretary of Commerce, Industry, and Analysis. You will be responsible for strengthening the globe's competitiveness in U.S. industry and overseeing key trade analysis. You would lead a team charged with value-added analysis and tools to support economic policy decisions. No doubt there's been a big sea change since COVID about supply chain issues and supply chain vulnerabilities and the interest that commerce play a larger role in identifying those risk sectors. Myself and Senator Risch have been leading a charge on fusion technology and hoping that we could be very aggressive on supply chain issues if, in fact, fusion technology gets to the actual point of manufacturing in the United States. So I look forward to working with you on those supply chain issues. And I want us to continue to know that we have to reduce tariffs. In my mind, tariffs are causing Americans to be challenged on affordability issues, and I look forward to working with you and asking you questions about that agenda as well. And welcome to our colleague from Tennessee, Senator Hagerty.
Thank you. I will now turn to our colleague from the great state of Tennessee, Senator Hagerty, to introduce Mr. Haynes. Senator Hagerty, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Chairman Cruz and Ranking Member Cantwell. Thank you for holding this important hearing. Mr. Isaacman, I want to congratulate you on your nomination and look forward to your confirmation. The reason I'm here today, though, is to introduce a former staffer, a good friend, and a fellow Tennessean, Stephen Haynes. Stephen Haynes is President Trump's nominee to serve as Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Industry and Analysis. But before I get into his introduction, I'd like to actually address all of the staff sitting along the walls here today. I hope you'll take a lesson from Stephen Haynes. He did a remarkable job serving on my team, a great member of my national security team, and frankly touched many aspects of our office. He's taking that knowledge and moving it into the administrative branch, into the executive branch, into this administration. And he's going to go on to do great things. And I just think it's testament to the fact that the hard work that all of you put in on both sides of the aisle to support our nation and to generate the type of opportunities that we want to see for our children and grandchildren can manifest itself in a career like Stephen's. And I hope, Stephen, that you'll continue to advance your career. It's one of the greatest honors I have to represent to be here and speak on behalf of my former staffers and to all of you.
Okay, so just a little bit of background thing. This is a double confirmation meeting, so that's who he's talking about. So Jared Isaacman is, they usually do two candidates at once.
This council was critical, covering nearly every issue that came to my office. From supporting my
He's talking about somebody else. This doesn't necessarily have to do with space, so I will I'll be talking over this part here, but when anything that has to do with Rook comes up, I will I'm gonna be quiet. That was the implication, Creeper. But fellas, yeah. So for the people that don't know, might not necessarily know about U.S. civics, okay? The NASA administrator position is not a, it's not a cabinet position, okay? So what is the presidential cabinet? The presidential cabinet is basically heads of all different facets of the government that serve directly to the president, okay? The NASA administrator is not necessarily that. So like Secretary of Defense, Chief of Staff, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, those are cabinet positions. That's like the presidential posse, we'll put it. It's not really the right way to say it. But so because the NASA administrator position is not a cabinet position, it has to be voted on by the Senate. The Senate is the upper the upper house of the legislative branch of the federal government. There are two houses in the legislative branch of the federal government. There's the senators, and then there's representatives. That's the upper and lower house.
40 letters of support.
She's big Isaacman guy. He likes
Without
Jared.
objection.
Thank you.
Executive
For
inner
nearly 70 years, the
circle.
United States has been at the forefront of space exploration. President Trump knows how critical it is for our country to.
So I'm just going to pause real quick. Because it's not a cabinet position, it has to be voted on by the upper house of the legislative branch of Congress. So this is a confirmation meeting to kind of understand what Jared Isaacman is all about.
Lead the way yet again as our space program.
Think of it
aims
like
to reach new heights, and
cross-examination
That's why
in
he
a-
chose exactly the
in
right
a
man
court.
for the job, Jared Isaacman. I've personally known Jared for several years, sharing an aviation community in Montana and cooperating with him on improving the education experience for our next generation of explorers, astronauts, engineers, NASA administrators at Space Camp in Huntsville, Alabama. Of note, both Jared and I attended Space Camp, and although I would say it lit a spark in both of us to chase the dream of aviation and aerospace, he's been far more successful than I have.
Yeah, Jay.
We both
Job
dreamed of
interview,
being
basically.
astronauts as children. The difference is Jared actually is one, whereas I had settled for the title of senator. We both dreamed of being astronauts as children. America has been the leader of global space travel for generations, pushing the boundaries of space and testing the limits of human endurance and intellect. All Americans should be deeply proud of the incredible accomplishments of heroes like Alan Shepard, John Glenn, Neil Armstrong, Jim Lovell, and many others. The sacrifice and leadership of these
Sup,
great
sup?
astronauts is what most Americans know. What they usually don't know is that behind each and every one of these explorers is a massive team of dedicated engineers, program managers, innovators, test pilots, welders, electricians, truck drivers, and families who are the true heroes of our space program. To lead this incredible team requires a leader who not only understands and believes in the mission, but has the interdisciplinary skill set to coordinate these cross-functional teams to achieve critical outcomes. Since the tragedy of the Columbia disaster in 2003, NASA has been an organization of great people searching for revival. And after the cancellation of the shuttle program for 10 years, it's important to remember, for 10 years, the United States was paying Russia taxi fare to send our own astronauts into space. This would make John F. Kennedy, Ronald Reagan, and dozens of others American leaders turn in their grave. And in light of the recent Starliner mission to the ISS that left astronauts stuck
Fair
in
point.
space for almost 9 months, we are reminded that much work remains. President Trump knew it was time for a change, and he chose the right man for the job. Despite Jared's desire to be an Air Force fighter pilot and astronaut as a child, he found out that he was smarter than most and started a disruptive software company in his garage as a teenager. That company grew to be a tremendous multi-billion-dollar success, and that success fueled his ascension in the Hall of Fame as a record-setting jet pilot, an aggressor pilot for Air Force fighter pilots, and most recently, this first civilian ever to conduct a spacewalk. On top of all that, Jared and I share another passion, pediatric philanthropy. Jared has personally donated millions to improve health care for at-risk children all over America, yet again underlining his commitment to this great nation. NASA is a point of great pride for our nation. It has carved out new frontiers for mankind and shown the world the power of freedom. China is progressing at a breakneck pace to overtake our space infrastructure and beat us back to the moon, and they fully intend to win. If we don't focus our efforts and commit to victory now, we will find ourselves going to bed under the glow of a red moon. We have a moral obligation to continue to lead on the greatest frontier ever known, and it requires strong leadership. Jared is an articulate leader, a great father and husband, and one of the smartest people in America. Jared understands not only how to manage a complex, multi-billion-dollar organization, but how to design and engineer critical systems. And to top it off, he knows how to fly spaceships. NASA is in need of spiritual rejuvenation, and that will take fresh leadership. Jared is the perfect man for the job, and I look forward to adding NASA administrator to his already remarkable resume. Thank you, Chairman.
I think it's safe to say that Mr. Sheehy likes him.
Thank you, Senator Sheehy. I will now recognize Mr. Isaacman for his opening statement.
Okay, here we go.
Thank you, Chairman Cruz, Ranking Member Cantwell, Senator Sheehy for that very generous introduction, and distinguished members of the committee.
All right,
I'm
I'm
honored
muting
and
the mic for a
grateful
while.
to be here before you again as President Donald Trump's nominee to lead the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. To begin, I'd like to acknowledge my family. So my parents, Sandy and Don Isaacman, behind me, my wife, Monica, my two wonderful daughters, Mila and Liv. So over the years, I've found many ways to challenge their patience, and politics is certainly no exception. We are also joined today by 7 astronauts, some of my closest friends and crewmates, together with NASA astronauts that have come to this hearing in support. Thank you very much. I also want to acknowledge and appreciate that Senator Britt from the state of Alabama is here today, so not only home to Marshall Space Flight Center, but also to Space Camp, which is where my journey began. As mentioned before, I have lived the American dream. I've been fortunate to have an amazing business and aeronautics career, to have led 2 notable missions to space, to help charitable causes that matter deeply to my family. And now I'm beyond thankful for a chance to repay my debt to this nation by serving alongside the brilliant minds at the world's most accomplished space agency. The last time I sat before you, I introduced myself, my qualifications, and the challenges and opportunities ahead. This time, I'm here with a message of urgency. After more than a half-century, America is set to launch NASA astronauts around the moon in just a matter of months. This is a challenging endeavor, to say the least, and one that requires full-time leadership. Secretary Duffy, in his letter to this committee endorsing my nomination, emphasized this point. The message is shared by more than 4 dozen other letters of support, including an online petition started by members of the NASA workforce and a letter from 36 NASA astronauts who, like me, have sat through anomaly investigations, launch and flight readiness reviews, and have accepted the risks of going to space and understand what is at stake. And I know it's not lost on anyone in this room that we are in a great competition with a rival that has the will and the means to challenge American exceptionalism across multiple domains, including in the high ground of space. This is not the time for delay, but a time for action. Because if we fall behind, if we make a mistake, we may never catch up, and the consequences could shift the balance of power here on Earth. This Congress, and specifically this committee, understand the urgency of the moment, placing a historic investment in human space exploration that President Trump signed in the One Big Beautiful Bill. It's now time for NASA and its partners to deliver. To that end, I want to assure you, senators, I'm not here for personal gain, to favor or enrich contractors, to close centers, or disrupt programs that are essential to completing America's objectives in space. If confirmed, I'm here to bring urgency and an extreme focus to the mission, to do all I can working with the best and brightest at NASA to lead humanity's efforts to unlock the secrets of the universe and ensure American leadership across the last great frontier. In concert with that grand endeavor, we will ensure the following: the success of the Artemis program that President Trump began during his first term. America will return to the moon before our great rival, and we will establish an enduring presence to understand and realize the scientific, economic, and national security value on the lunar surface. Along the way, we will pioneer the next giant leap in capabilities to extend America's reach even further into space, including expanding and accelerating investments into nuclear propulsion, both nuclear electric and nuclear thermal, and surface power programs. These efforts, in addition to industry partners building reusable launch vehicles, will set the stage for future missions to Mars and beyond. We will never accept a gap in capabilities again, not with our space station presence in low Earth orbit or our ability to send American astronauts to the moon. We will strive to build an orbital and lunar economy that can fund the future we all want to see in space someday and not rely exclusively on the taxpayer. We will begin making the investments now for the inevitable spacefaring future that is just on the horizon. We will make the most efficient use of every dollar allocated, pushing for more X-planes, more rovers and telescopes, more exciting missions like Hubble, James Webb, and Dragonfly, with the aim of enlightening the world through breakthrough scientific discoveries, knowing that if NASA doesn't do it, no one else will. Some of the most talented people in America show up to work at NASA, alongside a reinvigorated culture and an intense focus on achieving the near impossible, what no other organization is capable of or even dares to accomplish. We will achieve these objectives. And when, not if, we get the job done, it will be because of the professionals at NASA, our international and our commercial partners, this committee in Congress, and President Trump's administration that will have succeeded in ushering in a new golden age of science and discovery. We'll do it for America, for humankind, and in doing so, we will inspire the world and generations to follow to take us even farther. We are just getting started on the greatest adventure in human history, and with urgency and purpose and extreme focus on the mission, NASA will lead the way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Isaacman. And now I recognize Mr. Haynes for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Cruz. And here I was thinking that all the fanfare outside was for industry and analysis, but not the first time I've had my bubble burst. Chairman.
No, this is the other guy that's getting confirmed. I'm not 100% sure what he's there for. Hydrolox, did I talk about the Oleg Artemyev taking pictures of SpaceX engines? I did talk about that yesterday. I'd just like to remind everybody that this is a try not to rage challenge stream. I'm not going to, unless something really gets spicy, but we'll see. We'll see. It remains to be seen. Also, yeah, Oleg Artemyev can, he can go back to Russia and use their trampoline to get into space. Yeah. Yeah, he can do that. He can go use the trampoline. Hey, how's that Soyuz pad doing? Oh, it's broken. Oh, that's weird. What is nuclear energy propulsion? So near future nuclear propulsion, when it comes to the applications of spaceflight, can refer to two things. The first one would be nuclear thermal, which involves basically shoehorning a nuclear reactor inside of a rocket's combustion chamber. And instead of combusting something inside of that nuclear reactor, you flow hydrogen over the nuclear reactor to keep it cool.
Discovery, go and
Nuclear
drop.
Reactors really like to melt down. We've seen the fruits of that labor in the former Soviet Union. So cooling it with liquid hydrogen is actually superbly efficient because hydrogen is a great thermal conductor. And in doing that, you can actually make a rocket engine that does not combust anything, but basically just uses the waste heat of nuclear fission to make thrust. Nuclear thermal propulsion is pretty good. It's pretty good. It is a technology that already exists. It was pioneered during the Apollo program, and had the Apollo program kept going, NASA would have switched to a nuclear thermally powered third stage on the Saturn V. Had they have done that, they would have probably had a twofold increase in efficiency because nothing is getting combusted, only heated. It's very, very efficient. It's a very efficient application for thrust in space. There were 3 prototypes made for the nuclear thermal rocket program. And basically a working flight fidelity engine, the 3rd prototype, was tested at Jackass Flats in California. Yeah, I know. I just like saying that. And they did have an operable flight prototype. It was going to happen. And then with the nuclear test ban treaty, it kind of put nuclear thermal technology into a little bit of a gray area. And then with the cancellation of the Apollo program, the program got sacked. It's a shame because nuclear thermal technology. So let me put it to you like this. I'll speak nerd for a second. Nuclear thermal technology, that motor was able to produce 900 seconds specific impulse. Specific impulse refers to the burn time in seconds of an engine for a certain amount of propellant, right? That is a twofold increase on like the best chemical combustion propulsion that we have even nowadays. And this was in 1968. The best that we can do is an RL-10 or a B-3U or a space shuttle engine, producing about 450 seconds specific impulse from combusting hydrogen and oxygen. Nuclear thermal had a twofold increase in efficiency. It's also a little bit less mass because you don't have to carry an oxidizer with you. You're just heating hydrogen. But there is a little bit of a trade-off. A nuclear thermal engine is pulling you're pulling around a nuclear reactor inside of your engine. That gets to be a little bit heavy. Now, whether that pushes on the mass of fuel is debatable, and because of that, the nuclear engines are really heavy. That's the right way to say it. It's high mass. Higher dry mass on your stage. Higher dry mass on your stage is not necessarily good. The other type of technology is nuclear electric. Nuclear electric technology is basically using nuclear power to ionize a noble gas to create thrust. With a nuclear electric engine, you need just kind of a regular nuclear reactor that generates electricity, and you use electric propulsion. Nuclear electric propulsion could have efficiencies way past nuclear thermal, but nuclear electric hasn't been tested yet. That is not a matured technology. We haven't done it yet.
Success requires program.
It's kind of a difficult thing because that requires making a nuclear reactor in space. Nuclear reactors, as I said before, they produce a lot of waste heat. Now, the nuclear thermal engine gets rid of the waste heat in the form of thrust. With nuclear electric, that's not necessarily the case. You're gonna need a way to radiate all that heat off. But both of them are promising technologies. We could do either one, and I'd be happy with it. Nuclear electric, dudes, might as well be Star Wars. That's Star Wars stuff. Nuclear thermal is kind of a more near future application, but
To be able to execute its exploration missions. Will you commit to this committee and to the Senate to full and timely compliance with the law's requirements if you're confirmed?
that's regarding SLS.
Yes, Senator, I do.
Let's dive into those requirements. Congress wrote into the One Big Beautiful Bill that there shall be a stable, fully funded path for Artemis, at least through Artemis 5. Congress also dedicated money for the Gateway Lunar Orbit Space Station and the Orion crew capsule. Artemis is the key, I believe, to both beating China to the lunar surface and to maintaining a U.S. presence at the moon. What concrete steps will you take to maintain the Artemis program's long-term stability?
Senator, I appreciate the question, and similar to my previous hearing, I absolutely believe that the current architecture with SLS is the fastest path to achieving our near-term lunar objectives, which should be to return to the moon before our great rival and establish the infrastructure so that we can realize the scientific, economic, and national security value. Now, we have the first mission, which is approaching in just a matter of months, which is Artemis 2, where we will fly around the moon. The next mission, Artemis 3, we're going to land astronauts on the moon. There's a lot that has to happen in between Artemis 2 and 3. So in that respect, I am grateful that the One Big Beautiful Bill affords us the opportunity of additional heavy launch vehicles through Artemis 4 and 5. Now, in order for, with respect to the continuity of the mission, Senator, in order for us to actually land the astronauts on the moon, it will mean that one, or ideally two, commercial partners will have pioneered reusable heavy launch lift capabilities and orbital propellant transfer to get the lander to the lunar environment. And when we see American astronauts walk on the moon again, it means one or both of them were successful. So in doing so, after completing the Artemis 5 mission, which is already contemplated in the One Big Beautiful Bill, we should have numerous options available to us to have routine and affordable missions to the lunar surface for continuity beyond Artemis 5.
It's also part of U.S. law that it is American policy to have sustained human habitation either on the moon or in cislunar orbit. Do you agree with that objective, and do you commit to doing everything humanly possible to achieving it?
I do, Senator. I think the President of the United States would be very excited to see a lunar base.
And I will say, just a minute ago, you talked about competing providers. I want to be very clear. I have no particular interest in one provider versus another. My interest is in making sure the objective is achieved. And at times, some have suggested that the objective of going to the moon and the objective of going to Mars are in tension. I don't believe they're in tension. I believe both are critical. America will be the first to land on Mars. That is critically important. That is written into law, and I was proud to author that provision in law. But I also think at the same time we cannot lose the moon and lose the race to the moon to China. Do you agree that both are critical priorities?
I do, Senator. And again, consistent with my prior testimony before this committee, there actually are parallel efforts underway. Now there is no question the overwhelming near-term priority is to return American astronauts to the moon and, again, establish an enduring presence on what is a very scarce piece of real estate that we're interested in at this time. But as I mentioned before, in order for those American astronauts to step foot off a lander onto the lunar surface, it means one or both, and actually potentially many more commercial providers will have pioneered reusable heavy lift launch capabilities and on-orbit prop transfer, which is the same capability, really the next giant leap capability that America needs for missions to the moon, Mars, and beyond.
The International Space Station, which is managed from Texas's Johnson Space Center, is scheduled to be retired by 2030. It will be replaced by one or more commercially developed stations, partially funded by NASA and partially by private partners. Congress has been clear that a gap in our presence in low Earth orbit would jeopardize U.S. strategic interests. Will you commit to guaranteeing a continuous human presence in low Earth orbit and a continuous American presence during your tenure, and to ensure that there is no gap between the retirement of the ISS and the transition to commercial LEO destinations?
I absolutely commit to that, Senator. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, we can never accept a gap in our capabilities again, not in low Earth orbit or our ability to reach the moon. I, like a lot of space enthusiasts, dream of the day where we have multiple commercial space stations in low Earth orbit. But I think in order for that to be a financially viable model, we have to absolutely maximize the remaining life of the International Space Station, get the highest potential science and research to the space station to crack the code on the orbital economy to give all these commercial space stations a fighting chance.
Thank you. Senator Cantwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, I had to step out for a minute and take a call from another member, but I just want to make sure I heard everything you just said correctly on this. So when Secretary Duffy, as the acting, announced NASA would reopen to compete Artemis 3 human lander to ensure America would reach the lunar surface in 2028, you agree with that decision, and will you fully commit to this recompetition?
Well, Senator, I mean, both SpaceX and Blue Origin were already awarded contracts through a competitive process to build the lander, and I don't think it was lost on either one of those organizations that the first company that is capable of delivering a lander to take American astronauts to the lunar surface and back is the one that this nation is going to go with. I think that competition is fantastic. I think the best thing for SpaceX is a Blue Origin right on their heels and vice versa.
Great. Well, we're glad they recompeted, and when I first became ranking member of the committee, we argued for the redundancy of competition. There's nothing like competition to get the product that we need. And I think the decision that was made was based on the urgency to return by 2028. So you believe in that process?
Senator, I absolutely agree with competition. I think we need competition for the vendors that support NASA's critical mission. I think competition among world powers is actually a really good thing, just as long as we don't lose.
Okay. The R&D issue about high-rate composites, I mentioned in my opening statement, the HiCam project, which does have NASA's support in trying to generate more composites. We have, with Idaho, established a tech hub in thermoplastics, and really believe that the United States should not lose this race for high-rate composite manufacturing. Will you fight to keep for NASA's aeronautic budget to sufficiently fund such HiCam operations and support the technology development that is needed for aerospace materials?
Senator, I think it's squarely in the responsibility of the aeronautics portion of NASA to work on the absolute cutting-edge materials that will ensure the competitiveness of our aeronautics industry well into the future.
Okay, and then how can you further leverage NASA's university work for development and research?
I think, there's a couple parts to that, Senator. First, I think in general, it's part of NASA's responsibility towards inspiration in STEM education to award grants to academic institutions that give students hands-on opportunities with hardware, ideally inspire them to want to graduate and either work at NASA or contribute to industry. Also, I just think it's a great way to, crack the code on important research that's going to bubble up towards NASA achieving its important objectives.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Haynes, how do we get this supply chain onshoring or supply chain materials similar to this same subject? One of the reasons I became interested in the Tech Hub is actually an Idaho employer came to me and said, "Do you understand the Europeans are trying to buy us?" And I was like, no, I didn't understand that. And he said, yes, everybody's looking for the best technology, and they see it in our country, and they want to buy it, and we're not doing it and creating the supply chain. So how do you think this job and role you can help improve supply chain identifications for America's competitiveness, particularly in manufacturing?
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Senator. One word simply is mapping.
Excuse me, sorry. The title and the lack of cap tells me you're pissed at something. No, I'm not pissed. I'm just trying to not get annoyed. You know? This is just a Senate confirmation meeting. It's important. And, you know, ideally, guys, I want this to be boring. Ideally. Yeah. But, yeah, there's still plenty of time. Exactly. Still plenty of time. This is a try not to rage challenge, and I am not going to. It's not going to happen. But it's a Senate confirmation meeting. I thought I'd wear something nice. You know, I got my Falcon 9 dry fit. This is good. How long do these usually take? An hour, hour and a half. I'm not wearing pants. That's good to know, Fluffy. Thanks for letting us know. Thanks for letting us know. Will there be a rage counter on stream? Guys, I've been playing Battlefield. This ain't gonna piss me off. Battlefield pisses me off. This is nothing. You think this is gonna bother me? You need a Man I Love Falcon 9. That's a great merch idea, Chuck. That's a great merch idea. Should I present that to NSF? Should I tell Das? I don't think NSF would do that. I don't think they'd go for that. Okay, let's see what we got.
In the normal Senate process, in having this hearing, in hopes that
I'm pretty sure glaciers move at greater speed.
we share that view, Mr. Chairman, and nice to see that this committee is moving forward in regard to consideration of confirmation of a new NASA administrator. And I look forward to his confirmation and look forward to the Senate considering it, his approval in this committee and the Senate approving it presumably next week. Mr. Isaacson, let me start with you. My intended questions changed a bit because I received a letter this week from a Kansas farmer. And it captured my attention because I certainly share the views of Senator Cantwell and Senator Cruz in regard to the moon and Mars, and that's, I suppose, what nationally the public thinks about NASA is that we're on our way to some object in space and we're exploring space, but NASA has lots of roles. You've talked about STEM education being one of them. I want to mention for a moment the mission directive of science. And the letter that captured me is from a Kansas farmer named John
Smith.
Mr. Roth.
Oh.
He indicates to me that NASA's earth science investments, I'm reading from his letter, now directly support U.S. farmers in ways that were unimaginable even a decade ago. Tools based on NASA's data and science like OpenET, NISAR, the Rangeland Analysis Platform provide real-time, field-level insight into soil moisture, biomass, drought stress, water use, yield stability. These aren't future technologies, he says. They are already built, functional, and being used in states like mine.
That's right.
Today. He mentions FIAT is a national farmer science partnership that brings early development producers together with NASA researchers to co-develop practical on-farm tools using satellite data. This mission is to unite farmers with NASA to turn Earth observation technology into real-world decisions that support profitability, water efficiency, and risk reduction.
Yep.
Kansas farmer found value in NASA. It's something that we don't always talk about and think about when we think about space. I'm looking for your
Having food is kind of
thoughts in
important.
response to what this
Yep.
farmer is reminding me
It's
of.
probably a good thing.
How do you see NASA supporting or operationally developing the satellites that support precision agriculture? Tell me your response to this idea that NASA has a role to play in the everyday lives of Kansas and American agriculture.
Thank you for the question, Senator. At the present time, we only inhabit one planet, and Earth science is pretty vitally important. It's a role that NASA has had since the agency was established. We have Landsat satellites up there that are looking down, understanding droughts and flooding and wildfires, natural disasters, just almost essentially in real time that obviously play a direct role on the agriculture community. There's obviously our GPS constellations that are, going to go hand in hand with agriculture equipment for next generation farming. So I do see this as a vital role that NASA continues to fulfill.
Got to get those tram
I
lines
thank
straight.
you for that statement, that commitment.
Seriously. Farmers use GPS to make sure the tram line's straight. More efficient
I'm pleased to
farming
be a
that way.
member of this committee, and I chair the subcommittee
And?
on aviation and space. But I also serve as the chairman of the Senate Appropriations
Lumpy.
Committee that funds NASA as well as the Department of Commerce. And Mr. Isaacman, have you had a chance to look at our budget, our appropriations bill, and any response to what our committee has approved and what we expect to be on the Senate floor in the next 2 weeks?
Well, Senator, I don't think I can really comment on any pending legislation other than to say that we will absolutely maximize every dollar Congress affords to the agency.
Would you expand that commitment to say that you will execute the funding that we provide to NASA in this legislation as it's intended to be spent?
Senator, I will always follow the laws.
Thank you. I would also use this opportunity to indicate that upon our success in bringing the Commerce, Justice, Science bill to the Senate floor, I encourage all my colleagues who are so excited about space exploration and going to the moon and going to Mars, and maybe who have an interest in agriculture and earth sciences, I would encourage them to actually vote for the appropriation bill so that we can, in addition to authorizing and confirming personnel, we can actually accomplish the goals that this committee is spending time this morning highlighting. Let me ask about another aspect. I have 14 seconds. Let me ask a question in fairness so that the gentleman from Tennessee is not ignored. It a bit follows the question of Senator Cantwell, and that is making sure that you using ITA not only as a trade remedy for export promotion, but to be a proactive partner in shaping industrial policy, improving supply chain resiliency, and strengthening U.S. competitiveness. Tell me that you believe that's a significant component of what your job is and will be.
Thank you, Senator. That is the core component of the job.
Okay. Demon Hat with a 90-month resub. Shmemron had a 17-monther in there, too. Thank you very much. Yeah, guys, I'm purposely not talking whenever there's a question about Jared Isaacman. Like a question for Jared Isaacman. Hey, John Krause is over there. I heard about it, Erudite. Yeah, the landing burn didn't go so well. Okay.
Fine. Mr. Isaacman, as the administration looks to accelerate Golden Dome and strengthen national security space capabilities, how do you see NASA and the U.S. Space Force better coordinating their work in power, propulsion, communications, and hypersonic missile testing, especially given the unique test environments at places like Armstrong Test Facility to avoid duplication and move faster?
Thank you for the question, Senator. So clearly NASA's job is the peaceful exploration of air and space. It's also not lost on us that this is a domain that is of great strategic importance, and I do think in a fiscally constrained environment it is important that we are not having duplicate infrastructure or various bespoke programs when we could have a more unified approach to it. So, for example, a lot of the work that is done both at Glenn and Marshall Space Flight Center with nuclear has applications for peaceful exploration of space, surface power programs, but also Department of War implications. And I'd hope that we could collaborate, at least with some of our counterparts in other agencies, again, to avoid any duplicative spending or inefficient application of resources.
That's right. Speaking of nuclear, at NASA Glenn Research Center, We're leading the development of a 100-kilowatt lunar fission reactor. How should NASA build on this leadership in nuclear power and propulsion to ensure that the U.S. stays ahead in returning to the moon and reaching Mars?
Well, Senator, I love that question. I think NASA is funded by the taxpayers to do the near impossible. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, what no other agency or organization or even company is capable of doing or dares to do. I think NASA should be evolving to work on grand, almost mini Manhattan Project nuclear programs that have the benefit for surface power applications, especially when you're out of sunlight or you're undertaking discovery missions, let's say past Mars, for example, or even actually on the surface of Mars for manufacturing propellant. So I think there is this working, whether it's on nuclear electric propulsion, nuclear thermal propulsion, surface power programs, there is a ton of applications that NASA should be working on in that regard. And when NASA does work on the near impossible, what no one else is doing, it attracts the kind of talent that wants to participate in those programs and achieve these kind of, I guess, world-changing breakthroughs.
I appreciate that, and look forward to having you and hosting you in Cleveland at NASA Glenn. Very easy trip from home, so I won't keep him long. He'll be home for dinner if he comes and visits, as opposed to Texas, really far away. It's a very out-of-your-way trip to go down there, but Cleveland right around the corner. Mr. Haynes, the U.S. depends on specialized aerospace supply chains. What is your plan to strengthen domestic component manufacturing and reduce reliance on Chinese suppliers?
Thank you for that question, Senator, and thank you again for meeting with me yesterday. I appreciated the time and hearing what your priorities are.
Okay, so this guy is being confirmed for Secretary of Commerce, Industry, and Analysis. Interesting. I can't really speak to anything that's going on here. That's not my department. I can talk to you about the space stuff, but not really much else. Is that Ohio? Yes, NASA Glenn is... NASA Glenn's at the airport. It's at the airport just outside of Cleveland. I drove by it, actually, the other day. Yeah. When Bree and I were driving back from Detroit. You drive right by it. It's right by I-80. Also, fun fact, Ford's Cleveland engine plant is there. It's right across the street. Yeah, so you got like engine manufacturing, aeronautical research, and an airport like all next to each other. Those are three things I like. Too bad it's in Ohio. What? My wife's from Michigan. I have to give you guys crap. I'm obligated. I don't have a choice. I got roped into this. Like, it's not, I'm sorry.
7% and climbing of the cars sold in America being made in America. Without President Trump's policies, would that 6-point swing in less than a year have been possible?
No, Senator.
Thank you. No questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That was an
Thank
interesting
you, and
question.
now I
just wanted to hear
recognize
it.
Senator Kim.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Isaacman, good to see you again. Last time around, we had a lot of opportunities to be able to talk between the two of us. We both stress how important NASA is and space exploration is to our country, to our science.
Oh, yeah. Spunky.
And while we didn't see eye to eye on everything, I was willing to support you. Now you come before us again. And one thing that has come up that is on my mind right now is having seen a document named Project Athena. So I guess I just want to ask you, what is Project Athena, and do you stand by what is in that document?
Thanks for the question, Senator. So at the time of my previous nomination, moving into a new environment such as government service at a responsibility as great as the leadership of NASA, I had called a draft document that I continued to update based on my interactions with, well, the briefing leadership at NASA's agency, my interactions with various senators and their staff. Basically, ideas, thoughts on the direction of the agency, research requests. It was always something that was meant to be refined with actual data should I have been confirmed in it. But I do stand behind everything in the document, even though it was written 7 months ago. I think it was all directionally correct, consistent with prior testimony and my interactions with various senators.
So you're the author of the document?
I am,
Are
Senator.
you the sole author of the document?
I am, Senator.
So I guess the challenge that I have is when you came before this committee a couple months ago, actually in response to the chairman, you said to him, quote, "Senator, I have no intention as of now to say that I would cancel any program. I need to, if I'm confirmed to be getting a job, understand where things are at." And what we had talked about is that if you were confirmed that you would go in, you would allow yourself to be in the job before you make these decisions. You would engage with the NASA employees and others. So when I see in Project Athena comments like calling for a reevaluation of sustained lunar presence, I mean, you said to the chairman today that you're committed to Artemis, committed to an enduring presence on the lunar surface, but then you just tell me right now that you stand behind the document and stand behind, I assume, this statement about reevaluating the sustained lunar presence. So I'm just having trouble understanding what to believe. So do you stand by that comment in that line in Project Athena about reevaluating a sustained lunar presence?
Well, Senator, I mean, it was 62 pages worth of material, so I imagine any one sentence or so can be taken out of context. But in my prior testimony before this committee, I said it was imperative for us to realize our near-term lunar objectives. I think at the time I said, and determine the scientific, economic, and national security value of being on the lunar surface. I think today I come before you because there's overwhelming clarity within the administration of not only to return the moon before our arrival, but also establish the infrastructure for an enduring presence. So that naturally, 6-7 months is an awful lot of time. But I would say, Senator, there's probably 10 pages within that plan that call for research requests to make sure that you gather the accurate information to inform a definitive plan. But I certainly do stand behind the idea that if anyone's going into a position of great responsibility, it's better to go in with a plan than none at all, sir.
But isn't it better also to have humility in the job and to be able to go and engage the experts and the scientists who have been doing this work? I mean, I don't mind people having a vision and having priorities, but you had told this committee that you would hold off on making up your mind. But the document very much came, and I wasn't trying to take anything out of context. I'm giving you the opportunity to explain it. So, like, for instance, you responded to a colleague of mine about the importance of climate science and the role that science is playing, NASA is playing in that way. But in the Project Athena, you say, quote, you say NASA should be, quote, taken out of taxpayer-funded climate science business and leave it for academia to determine. That stands in contrast, I feel like, with things that we've heard you say before. So I guess I wanted to ask you, do you stand by that statement of taking NASA out of climate science business?
Well, and Senator, first of all, I completely agree with you, by the way. I think humility is an important quality of leadership, and that's why, again, I would say if it's not 10 pages, it could be 20 pages of the 62 that specifically call for research requests from across the associate administrators, the various subject matter experts to inform a definitive plan. That's throughout the entire document.
The statement here did not seek a request. It was determinative in saying that it should take out, and also in terms of laying out cutting of thousands of civil servant positions. So look, I'm out of time. We will follow up. But as I said, I'm trying to be someone who can work together. I think this needs to be bipartisan going forward. But some of what I saw in that document, so in contrast to things that I heard you say before, at least what you have assured me about, it's okay to say that you changed your mind or that you don't agree with everything that you said in that document. I had expected you to say that, but instead when you come here before us today and say that you stand behind what's in that document, that causes us to have further follow-up here to understand what your positions are.
And Senator, I would welcome any opportunity to get together, and I would happily talk through anything in that plan or that document and give you the rationale behind it, and I'd welcome your feedback. To do this job is going to absolutely take the cooperation with this committee and the Congress.
Thank you for that. And with that, I'll yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Isaacman, I wanted to ask you, so let's just pretend you're in Missouri among
I don't think that was an out of line of questioning, guys. It really wasn't. That was fine. I'll talk more about Project Athena later.
Is it important that the United States of America gets to the moon first or gets to Mars first ahead of the Chinese? What would be your answer?
Well, Senator, I think there's a couple reasons, one of which is fulfilling a promise that's been made by every president since 1989 and over $100 billion that's been funded by taxpayers on our grand return to the moon. I think it's imperative that we do so, and failing to do so calls into question American exceptionalism beyond just our expertise in the high ground of space. Second, I do believe, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, that when we return, we will have an opportunity to determine and realize the scientific, economic, and national security value on the lunar surface. Now, an example I used in my, my previous hearing is that there is helium-3 on the moon. Not a lot of it, but certainly more than there is here on Earth, and that is predicted to be a more efficient source of fusion power. Now, I mean, our foreign policy and wars have been fought for a century over sources of power. To get that wrong could have implications here on Earth that could change the balance of power.
We have in this country, I think, a pretty robust ecosystem of new companies, small businesses, sort of disruptors that have entered the fray here as it relates to whether it's commercial space exploration or travel or what have you. How can NASA, in your role, help sort of cultivate that, work with them? Because I do think that's one of the advantages we have over China in this race. What can you do as in this potentially this new role?
Senator, it's a great question, and a lot of people do believe generally these are new developments, but in reality, going back to the 1960s in the space race, NASA worked alongside some of our great aerospace companies. I mean, whether it was Boeing or McDonnell Douglas or Northrop, for sure, sir. So a lot of those names are still very relevant within the space program today. And then there's also a lot of new names that is referred to sometimes as new space or commercial space. I think it's going to take, the contributions of the many to do the near impossible. Now, where NASA can play a role is consistent in the past, which is sharing its expertise and talent to help these new companies. When NASA does tend to figure out the near impossible and it's mature enough technology to hand it off to industry where innovation can improve upon the capability and lower cost, that's a great outcome. I also think NASA can do a very good job expressing the need. What is the requirement? Because there are lots and lots of commercial space companies now. I think Ranking Member Cantwell mentioned, I think she said over 1,000 in her state alone. That's fantastic. We just want to make sure they're all working on things that bubble up to our most important objectives. So I think NASA can do an even better job of working with industry to outline the problems that need to be solved and ensure we're kind of concentrating American ingenuity in the right direction, sir.
Well, I think that to put on the parochial hat for a moment, I think St. Louis is a defense tech hub with former McDonnell Douglas and Boeing with their defense side, the NGA West, which is completing their new facility. There's a lot of opportunities, and which leads sort of the next question on quantum. Washington University in St. Louis is doing a lot of really important work here. How do you see NASA's role in furthering that mission, right, to be on the cutting edge? Because I think what I was getting at with the first question, all of this, civilizations come and go, right? And in many ways, whoever has the most advanced technology, whether it's warfare or on the more the commercial side, they tend to thrive and win this great competition. And NASA is going to is playing a very important role, continue to play an important role. How do you see on the quantum side NASA working with research institutions and the private sector?
It's an excellent question, Senator. So,
thank you, by the way. Yeah. Thank you for that.
I mentioned earlier about the importance of determining the orbital economy. So for 60 years, other than a few exceptions, the space economy has still come down to launch, observation, and communication, which is largely funded by the government. And if we do want a very exciting spacefaring civilization in the future with lots of space stations and orbital, lunar outposts and Mars bases, we're going to actually have to figure out that economy. There's a lot of prospect when it comes to quantum computing, quantum communications, and what I would like to do is ensure that the highest potential science and research has a expeditious path to the International Space Station so we can maximize that remaining life and then hopefully crack the code on the orbital economy that gives all the commercial space stations a fighting chance. So quantum has a number of applications that can take advantage of the unique environment of microgravity, sir.
Well, thank you for your service, and I wish you all the best in this new position. Good luck. Yep.
Welcome, gentlemen. Welcome to the committee, and congratulations on your nominations. Mr. Isaacman, welcome back to the committee. You were here before for this position, and as we all know, President Trump withdrew your nomination earlier, citing concerns with your, I believe, political donations to Democratic candidates. And in a July 6th post on Truth Social, the president also stated that it would be absolutely inappropriate for you to head NASA, given your close relationship with SpaceX CEO Elon Musk. Since that time, there have been additional reports that in the time between your nomination being pulled and now being renominated by the president, I think you've donated roughly $2 million to President Trump's super PAC. So based off this information, I'm concerned that the decision-making around this position may not have been about ensuring NASA has strong leadership to carry out its mandate. So could you please explain what happened to make President Trump reconsider the decision to pull your nomination, and what assurances you may have provided, if any, that your relationship with Elon Musk and SpaceX would not create a significant conflict of interest for you in this role?
Well, Senator, there's a lot there, so I will try and hit it all. If I miss
Back it all.
If I miss anything, please ask me to correct. So first and foremost, I wouldn't even begin to want to speculate, why the president nominated me, withdrew it, and renominated me, other than to say I was grateful for the opportunity in the first place. It was an incredible experience. When the president pulled my nomination, he gifted me an extended summer vacation where I could take my kids on some adventures before they lose interest in me. And then I understand that he ran a competitive process and interviewed several candidates. I was grateful for consideration at the time, and happy to be here now. In terms of donations, I think it was covered over the summer. I actually felt I had enough exposure to Washington and got over maybe some of the initial intimidation factors, so much so that I thought perhaps I would have a political career, maybe be able to contribute for all the right reasons. So it shouldn't be surprising that I supported the Republican Party. At the same time period, I probably made 30 times that amount in donations to charitable causes. With respect to Elon Musk, that question comes up. In fact, every story I see that writes about my nomination refers to the Musk ally or the Musk friend. It's funny that in a world where everybody has a phone with a camera on it, there are no pictures of us at dinner, at a bar, on an airplane, or on a yacht, because they don't exist. My relationship with Mr. Musk is the fact that I led 2 missions to space at SpaceX, because it's the only organization that can send astronauts to and from space since the shuttle was retired. And in that respect, my relationship is no different than that of NASA.
Mr. Haynes, congratulations on your nomination to such a critical role as well. That
was a really good answer. Yeah. That was a really good answer. Yeah, that was good. That was good. Yeah. Also, guys, don't belittle people for saying stuff wrong. I say stuff wrong all the time. He said Elon Musk. Dude, remember, streamer brain, dude. These people know that they're on camera. They know that this is being streamed. And that messes with your brain a little bit. If they pronounce something incorrectly, don't get up their tail about it. That happens, man. How often do I say stuff incorrectly? I misspeak all the time. But yeah, that was a good answer. You're absolutely right, AJ. Yes. Yeah, that's right. Of course you're gonna say that. You're from Boston. What? Do we not say things correctly? Can you not understand what we are saying? Or something? If you have streamer brain, does that not mean you're actually a Jets fan and not a Patriots fan? I mean, Zizep, I'm never satisfied with myself, so I do kind of hate myself a little bit all the time, but I use that as motivation to get better. Unlike the Jets, so no. I mean, no. I need subtitles? Why do I need subtitles? All right. How do you like the Lions so far? Too many injuries. People are hurt. They're not playing good football. They need to play better. The talent is there. All right. Back into it.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Haynes, we've heard a lot about the politicization of job numbers and economic statistics over the past year since.
It's a question for the other guy. Sounds like Michigan football in general. Ooh. How long does this hearing take? It's usually about 90 minutes. We're about. I mean, they can go long. It's possible. We're 73 minutes in, give or take. What question, space-wise, would you have for Jared if you were on the committee? Outdoorsman. It depends. I suppose that entirely depends on where I was a senator to. Are you saying, like, if I was a senator from Massachusetts, what questions would I ask? In that case, I would just say, hey, the Draper Lab's up here. We worked on the guidance system for the lunar lander. Massachusetts has a gigantic aerospace sector. Would you be utilizing this at all? That's probably what I'd ask. Yeah, when can Boston get a shuttle? Why do we need a shuttle? We don't need a shuttle. Yeah, Chris, the Jared Isaacman was on unsubscribed. That's pretty cool. I mean, that would be awesome to have a shuttle in Massachusetts, but we don't need a shuttle in Massachusetts. How about the shuttles just stay where they are? That's pretty good. What about generally? If I generally had a question for Rook for this meeting, I would ask him about where NASA's place is as a launch service provider in the next 15 years. That's what I would ask. Like, what does NASA ideally? What does NASA look like in 15 years if you had complete control for that long? I obviously no term limits, et cetera, but yeah, we have Battleship Cove. Battleship Cove's pretty cool. Just saying. The reason why I'm curious about that is because there's obviously commitments in the One Big Beautiful Bill for, out to Artemis 5. And it's very clear that we want to keep going with the Artemis program after that. So what does the Artemis program look like in 15 years when commercial space could potentially have viable technology to get all the way to the surface of the moon, i.e. New Glenn with Blue Moon Mark 1, New Glenn 7x2 with Blue Moon Mark 1, New Glenn 9x4 with Blue Moon Mark 2, Blue's orbital tug that they want to use for refueling and going back and forth between the Earth and the Moon that they have been working on, Starship, HLS, Starship in-flight refueling. Like, where does NASA, will NASA still have a need for an in-house space program with launch services in the future? And if so, what happens to the facilities that they are currently utilized are currently utilizing for this, because like if you think about the supply chains,
Discovery, go at throttle up.
he's in tier 2 98-month resub. If you think about the supply chains that is needed for the SLS program, you have facilities that are quite useful and still very unique in technology. The VAB, good example. Pad 39B, another great example. The crawler transporters, the mobile telephones, the crawler transporters, the mobile launcher-ish. Michoud. Michoud is a facility that is capable of manufacturing rockets up to 10-meter core size. Saturn V's, for instance. What do we do with all that? What do we do with it? What does that look like? We should move the shuttle to the British Museum? No. No, it's ours. You can't have it. You could put your own rockets in museum. Oh wait, you already do that.
You again, Mr. Isaacman. You may recounter that during your last nomination hearing, you refused to confirm whether Elon Musk, with whom you have deep personal and financial ties, was present at the meeting that then President-elect Trump offered you the job of NASA administrator. So I wanted to give you one more chance to set the record straight. Was Elon Musk in the meeting at Mar-a-Lago when President Trump offered you the job?
Senator, it's great to have a conversation again. I thought we really ran this one to ground last time, but what I will tell you, Senator, and I wish I had the opportunity to explain it further before, is my first interview with the president, I think I've had several opportunities since to re-engage, was in a ballroom type setting, Senator. There were dozens of people moving in and out that I would not say were in the meeting.
It's a very simple question. Was President Trump in the room when, was Elon Musk in the room when President Trump offered you the job?
Senator, my interview, my conversations with the president, and there were dozens of people moving in and out of the room, and I don't think it's fair to bring any of them into this matter.
So you once again, you're refusing to tell us whether Elon Musk was in the room that day. And that actually makes me think that Elon Musk was in the room that day, but that you understand that it's a clear conflict of interest that he was there. You're asking us to confirm you as the next NASA administrator, and SpaceX gets $15 billion from American taxpayers for its business with NASA. You also have multiple financial relationships with Elon Musk, including investments in SpaceX, a contract between his company Starlink and your payments company, and even more, you bought space flights from SpaceX. Mr. Isaacman, what was the value of these contracts for space flights with SpaceX?
Well, I mean, Senator, just to clarify on these points, I have no direct or indirect equity exposure to any aerospace company, including SpaceX. I have disclosed all of my financial ties to the ethics officials at NASA, as well as the Office of Government Ethics. They've generated an ethics letter. I fully intend to adhere to it. I more than acknowledge that I went to space twice with SpaceX, but I point out they're the only company capable of sending astronauts to and from space since the shuttle was retired. My relationship with them is no different than NASA's. In fact, if there was more than one company, I suspect I would have paid less.
So what was the value of the contracts for space flights with SpaceX?
I mean, Senator, I don't think it's lost on anyone that going to and from space is rather expensive. We never disclosed the...
Well, your financial paperwork suggests it was over $50 million. So was it $100 million? Was it $200 million?
Senator, we've never disclosed it other than the fact that we were able to raise substantially more than the cost of the mission for charitable causes like St. Jude.
So you won't tell us how much you paid the man who publicly campaigned for your nomination. Will you request that SpaceX release you?
They didn't give me a discount, Senator.
I appreciate that, but you were paying him. Will you request that SpaceX release you from the NDA so that you can provide the committee with this information?
Senator, I will commit to always work with the appropriate ethics professionals to make sure I'm, continuously in compliance with my ethics agreement.
Will you ask him to release you from the NDA so that you can provide that information to the committee?
I have no issue asking them to release me from non-disclosure, Senator.
Okay, that would be helpful. Mr. Isaacman, can you tell us, since President Trump initially withdrew your nomination, have you had any communication with Mr. Musk about the job of NASA administrator?
I have not, Senator.
You have not. So the American people actually deserve to know how much money you have spent personally on SpaceX, and whether the head of SpaceX and Starlink, Elon Musk, was personally involved in your nomination, because we're looking at conflicts of interest so big that they have their own center of gravity, and we just have to make sure that it's all out there and it's fully understood by the American people. And since your last nomination, we've received the President's 2026 budget request, which proposes a nearly 50% cut to NASA's science funding. Do you support President Trump's proposal to cut NASA's science funding in half?
Senator, I certainly support the President's goal of reducing the deficit and shrinking our national debt. Now, an awful lot has happened from the initial presidential budget request to the continuing resolution that we've been operating in, to the one big beautiful bill that has plussed up additional funding for NASA. So I would, if I'm confirmed, I'd love to get my arms around where we are presently at.
Well, a 50% cut to the NASA science budget is dramatic, and considering reports about your, quote, Project Athena plan for NASA, which literally banks on the decimation of our scientific abilities. Among other things, this document calls for NASA to stop collecting its own data and instead set up a taxpayer-funded subscription service from private companies for their products, companies that will set their own price for data that NASA needs to function on an ongoing basis. Would Starlink or SpaceX be companies that NASA would potentially have to turn to obtain data?
Well, Senator, first of all, I think pretty much everything you just said there was not correct. What that draft document contemplated was working with commercial companies for certain types of Earth observation data, not SpaceX or Starlink. I think I specifically called out Planet and Black Sky as examples of companies that might be able to deliver Earth observation and climate science data at lower cost, specifically to free up resources for other planetary science missions that commercial companies are not capable of doing.
Well, I would say this, that the proposal, and this is the truth, the proposal would strip NASA for parts and instead transfer taxpayer funds directly to the bank accounts of Starlink and SpaceX, companies owned by the very same man who may or may not have been in the room when Trump offered you the job. And we're just going to have to keep a very close eye on what...
Starlink is not an Earth observation satellite. Oh my God. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. Mr. Isaacman, great to see you again. Let's talk about NASA's Quest program of quiet supersonic. You know, it's designed to de-risk the science, validate the quiet supersonic technologies, and then let American industries like Boom, for instance, which has a presence in North Carolina, let them take the lead in building the commercial market. So as administrator, how will you ensure that NASA stays focused on enabling that new industry and avoids creating unintentional regulatory or technical barriers for the next generation supersonic flight?
Well, Senator, this is certainly a subject that I'm pretty passionate about. I do think it's NASA's job. I believe it's funded by taxpayers to explore the near impossible in air and space. And when they arrive at a major development and that capability is mature enough to hand it off to industry where competition can drive innovation and bring down costs. X-59 is an interesting example. There is some overlap with what Boom's doing. I think actually Boom is an extraordinary company. I'd love to see a lot more American companies trying to break the status quo and take on big, bold projects like that. I think NASA just needs a lot more X-planes, honestly. That was a really exciting one that we all had an opportunity to watch rather recently alongside the recent performance from Boom. But I'd love to see us have multiple programs that are exploring radical designs in airframe and propulsion. And when they do have those breakthroughs, not dissimilar to the 1970s, 1980s, when NASA was experimenting with fly-by-wire and thrust vectoring capabilities that have made their way in commercial aircraft as well as military aircraft like the F-22.
Do you think there's a problem with Quest eventually competing against Boom? Do you think that's a potential problem?
No.
No, I would certainly hope.
I'd say the whole industry, not just Boom in particular.
I'd certainly hope not, Senator. I actually don't think NASA's at its best when it's doing what industry is doing, because at that point, talent would naturally probably gravitate to industry where they get the advantage of, who knows, appreciating stock options and such. I think NASA should constantly be recalibrating to work on that near impossible, what no one else is doing, which is going to attract that kind of exciting technology. That's going to attract that kind of talent to work on that exciting technology. When they figure it out, they hand it off to industry and they recalibrate to the next big, bold endeavor. I think that serves the talent, workforce, and the mission of NASA very well.
Thank you. You know, in your testimony earlier, you were clear that the United States is in the middle of a second space race. The great rival that you mentioned spent more than a decade establishing a space Silk Road, offering collaboration on satellite, space launch, space infrastructure development to more countries across the Middle East and North Africa. So how does this sort of space diplomacy from an adversary affect our prospects for continuing dominance in space? And what's your vision for space diplomacy of ours?
Well, Senator, I think there's a couple parts to that. So first, NASA has always been referred to, as a soft power. There's lots of diplomatic implications to their mission. A lot of our greatest endeavors are worked on with our allies across Europe, the Middle East, Canada, for example. I think what's concerning now is that some of these countries have more than one choice. So for the longest time period, America owned the ultimate high ground of space, and that attracted the interest of many nations to want to collaborate and partner with us. The Chinese do have their own space station now. They went from a single technaut in orbit approximately 20 years ago to having a space station where they're launching at an extraordinary cadence. So I think this is why there needs to be urgency to take a close look at NASA, what's going right, and do a lot more of that, and the things that are going wrong to clear those obstacles and paths so we can get back to doing, world-changing missions again.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks again for your time. Chairman?
Good answers.
Thank you. Senator Lujan.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so very much for that and for calling this hearing. Mr. Isaacson, welcome back to the Commerce Committee. I guess I'll just start out by simply asking, Mr. Isaacson, you believe in science?
Of course, Senator.
You support science?
I do, Senator.
You've conducted a lot of science experiments throughout not just your youth, but through your career, correct, sir?
Yes, sir.
I appreciate that. Now, a few of my colleagues have raised the concern about the nearly 50% cut to NASA's Science Mission Directorate, a directorate that is explicitly foundational to NASA's 1958 Congressional Charter. I think by the very nature of the number of questions that you're receiving today from colleagues about NASA, it shows the broad support for the science mission at NASA as well. Congress has already made clear that we rejected these cuts and will continue to fund the scientific missions that uphold NASA's statutory purpose. My question, yes or no, is do you agree that NASA has a statutory obligation under its founding charter to conduct and support Earth and space science for the benefit of the nation?
Yes, sir.
I appreciate that. Now, this is going great, Mr. Isaacson. Many of NASA's science programs are not commodities. You cannot run a value-added calculation on dual-use information that supports both science discovery and national security. Now, for example, these missions provide indispensable space weather data. We were chatting about that before. I appreciate my colleague reminding us all across America when we pull out our devices or we're depending on the simple services that we interact with every day that we're touching some of this and we depend on it. Like your friend, Mr. Musk, I would say some of the commercial actors, they depend on after solar activity has repeatedly disrupted their constellations as well. Now, NASA, Earth science assets also ensure GPS integrity, track environmental changes, everything you just described. U.S. military readiness, critically important. National security, the importance of the science directorate. So let me ask you directly, yes or no, will you execute the funds appropriated by Congress for NASA's critical science missions exactly as Congress has directed?
Yes, sir. We will maximize the scientific value of every dollar that Congress affords the agency.
I appreciate that very much. My last question is, while I didn't support the reconciliation bill that passed over the summer, there are pieces of it, particularly in NASA's section, that hold promise, and I appreciate the inclusion of them. For example, the NASA section funds a Mars telecommunications orbiter, specifically one that was proposed independently when NASA solicited its commercial industry for Mars sample return mission architecture from space. I see you nodding. You're very familiar with this, I imagine.
Reasonably familiar, Senator.
The orbiter would not only support future exploration missions, but most importantly, it would help support the critical comms relay needed for existing and future science missions like the Mars sample return. Now, New Mexico is home to companies like Rocket Lab, who produce the world's highest efficiency space-grade solar and powered critical NASA missions and would power the MTO, for example. So yes or no, do you commit to following through on the letter of the law and ensuring a rapid acquisition strategy for the MTO to be able to deliver it by the law's 2028 due date?
Senator, my commitment to you and all the other members is always to follow the law. As a space enthusiast, I am super excited about any activities that open up further science and discovery on Mars.
Appreciate that very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Klobuchar.
Yeah, is that line of questioning didn't piss me off. I'm not really understanding what he's getting at there. I don't understand the line of questioning. I think he thinks he's, yeah, I don't know. That was a weird line of questioning, but yeah.
Hugely valuable for farmers. Programs like NASA Acres and NASA Harvest use satellite imaging to forecast production and monitor crop yields. I'm the ranking member on the Ag Committee, and I've introduced legislation called the Agriculture Innovation Act to strengthen that data collection. Could you talk about your plans to preserve and expand those types of monitoring programs, weather patterns and the like, and how you can better work with the Department of Agriculture?
Sure, Senator. I appreciate the question. As I mentioned with Senator Moran before, at the present time, we at least inhabit only a single planet, and it's probably important for us to continue to study it to the greatest extent possible. NASA's had a long-running program with Intelsat. I fully support that we should be gathering data that especially contribute to hardships here on Earth. I mean, obviously, there's great agriculture opportunities, but these can be impacted by droughts and wildfires and flooding, and grateful that NASA has the capability to gather some of this data in real time. I don't see that going away ever.
Thank you. Other end of our state, Mayo Clinic, which I'm sure you're aware of. They've been involved in space medicine since 1960, when research related to the force of gravity during acceleration influenced the position of seats for the Mercury spaceflight program, and most recently, they've identified some important research project in the field of aging, regenerative medicine that can be conducted in space. How will you continue to support NASA and institutions like Mayo's efforts to advance science that helps here on Earth?
Senator, I couldn't agree with this area of study more. We are actually quickly reaching a point where it's no longer a technological limitation for deep space type missions, but human physiology and psychology. So in that respect, I obviously fully support all the studies that can be done so that when the day comes that we actually send NASA astronauts to Mars, that they can come home healthy enough to tell us about it. This is probably the single greatest accomplishment we've had on the International Space Station over the last quarter of a century, is keeping humans alive in an environment that is quite challenging.
Mm-hmm. And then just on the research side, a lot of academic institutions like the University of Minnesota rely on publicly funded data from NASA's missions. And as NASA continues to partner with private firms, the commercial data is not as easily accessible to researchers. And I think it's a balance. Obviously, the partnering with private has brought with it some success, but then you want to have the public institutions be able to access that data for the public portion of this, which has helped us. I'm not going to go through all the inventions and things that have come out of this type of space mission. So what steps will you take to ensure that data from NASA missions continues to remain available for researchers across the country?
Senator, I fully support it, and I think this actually goes to some of the questions from Senator Markey before. I absolutely think that NASA should be making available all of its data, especially its Earth observation data, freely to academia, so they can draw their own conclusions from it. I don't think it's the most helpful every 4 or 8 years when administrations change that certain scientific positions become overly political. I think that we should be making that data available to academic institutions and let their scientists and research draw their own conclusions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Haynes, congratulations on your nomination. We have a lot of manufacturers in my state, a lot of them high-end robotics manufacturers. We do a huge amount of trade, not just in the ag area where we're fourth in the country for ag exports, but throughout.
Yeah, so this is a question for the other dude. Outdoorsman, you're saying, how does NASA draw a balance between private government without hurting themselves? I think that is a huge question, Outdoorsman. That's a huge thing to understand. Where does the line between what NASA does and what commercial does end and start? That's a very important thing, and that's going to be a really big thing for NASA over the next 15 years. Can we listen to this? Sure, if you want. If you guys want me to explain how all of this works when we're done, I have no problem explaining civics. That's no problem. In application to NASA. That's fine. The vote should be next week, Alleviate. Yeah. Yeah, Pat. Mm-hmm. Interesting.
It's in writing, but I do a lot with Brand USA, and Senator Sullivan and I just introduced a major reauthorization of this, and Senator Rosen.
He's doing all right, Trey. Yeah, he's doing
a little bit
just fine.
about this, representing Las Vegas. And so just anything you can do to strengthen programs like Brand USA that don't use taxpayer dollars to ensure we continue to remain competitive with U.S. tourism, and especially with World Cup, the 2028 Olympics, and other major events that are coming up.
Yes, ma'am, Senator. You
No,
absolutely
Lazarus,
have my
it's
commitment
not.
to do that. I have met with Fred Dixon and Brand USA multiple times.
So this guy is a position in the secretary he's serving under the Commerce Secretary for Industrial Analysis. So supply chains in the United States. Like this guy likes playing workers and resources, if that makes any sense.
Serving Mr. Isaac.
Not to say that workers and resources, communist gate, et cetera, et cetera. Not that he's a logistics guy.
Very much.
He's you.
I appreciate your presence here.
Yeah.
Mr. Haynes,
yeah.
Congratulations. The global economy is increasingly driven by cross-border data flows, digital services, and online platforms. And U.S. firms are facing more foreign barriers, such as data localization rules and discriminatory digital taxes. Within ITA, industry and analysis is already involved in tracking these digital barriers and advising on market access for U.S. providers. If confirmed, Mr. Haynes, how do you see INA's role in digital trade evolving? And what would be your top priorities for ITA's work on open digital markets and cross-border data flows?
Thank you for that question, Senator
What?
Young, and appreciate also speaking to your staff yesterday. It was
yes, sir.
Good to hear your priorities. I would say two things. Within the
So sorry, I don't mean to talk over Mr. Haynes so much. I can't really comment so much on this stuff. So Petrie, you asked a question. So is it the end of this after the meeting? No, this is a Senate confirmation meeting. So what these meetings serve for is cross-examination of the nominee for non-cabinet executive positions in the government. Now, NASA is not necessarily part of the executive branch of the United States, but the executive branch does pick NASA's goals. So the president picks NASA's goals. That's really important to understand. However, Congress funds these goals, okay? So it's not just about having a grandiose plan. You need to be able to have Congress to back you up to be able to fund whatever plan you choose. And that does require working together. You need to get a pretty significant majority to, get the funding that you need for NASA to do what NASA needs to do. Now, I'm digressing a little bit. Now, what happens here is this is for cross-examination. Think of it like cross-examining a witness in a court case, right? That's why this is kind of playing out kind of like a court. Like there's cross-examination. You press the witness. That's what Ed Markey was doing. And that's what Kim was doing, and that's what everybody's doing. And some people are there to just get testimony. Other people are there to push, just to see what's going on. After this, there will be a vote in the Senate, in a Senate meeting. It should be next week, if I'm understanding this correctly. That's tentative, though. Could be whenever. All agencies are our executive branch. That would be a better way to say it. So the Senate will vote on it. There is 100 senators, 2 senators, a junior and a senior senator from every U.S. state. There's 50 U.S. states. Pretty straightforward math. They will take a vote on it. If majority wants Jared Isaacman for NASA administrator, the Senate will confirm him for NASA administrator. This cross-examination here is to get on the books, on federal testimony, federal congressional testimony, where Jared Isaacman stands. And people will use this information or not to senators will use this information to be informed on voting for his nomination whenever the Senate decides to vote on it. This highlights the problem with NASA for decades. The decentralized nature of it, and Senator Rep wanted to know what's in it for my state, is a dilution of resources and mandate. Yes, Astro Knucklehead, I understand that it is kind of frustrating, but we've made it work before. There's no reason we can't make it work again. It worked during the Apollo program. Like I said, it's checks and balances in our system. And once I think people want me to explain, especially people that aren't from this country, want me to explain how the U.S. civic system works in the applications of NASA, and I'm more than happy to do that. I'm more than happy to do that. No partisan nonsense. No point to make. I'll just explain how our system works. That checks and balances does force us to work together, and that's the whole point. That's the whole purpose of this. The whole point of this experiment, that is the United States, is our ability to self-govern. And self-governing means that you're going to encounter people that you don't like, that you share a country with. And it's important to understand. The whole system is set up for checks and balances so nobody consolidates power, because the founding fathers were worried about a king. Because the whole point of the American Revolution was rebelling against a constitutional monarchy for a representative republic. That's important to know, and it's important to understand. So yes, dude, long story short, as a spaceflight fan, it gets convoluted and annoying. It's such a contrived system that it seems like nothing gets done. I can very much understand that, but also at the same time, checks and balances is way more important than that. The system can be leveraged to work. The Apollo, Gemini, and Mercury programs are a very good example of this. Even the space shuttle, to an extent, if you want to argue long-term sustainability of a program. Anyway, just something important to understand.
In our state, and I fully support working on a national strategy, because Nevada, of course, has some of the largest critical mineral deposits in the country. And so we are very mineral rich, as you know, and thank you for being here. But I'm going to focus a little bit on tourism. I'm going to bring us down to earth and ask about my travel and tourism work and some of the bills that we've had, because in 2023, I had a bipartisan bill, the Omnibus Travel and Tourism Act, was signed into law, and that bill created a position of Assistant Secretary of Travel and Tourism at the Department of Commerce. The new position is the first tourism dedicated assistant secretary in the United States, and among other matters is responsible for setting annual visitation goals, creating whole-of-government strategies to ensure that visitation goals are met, establishing interagency coordinations to support U.S. tourism, which I would argue is in the top economic driver of every state in our great nation. This new office will also play an essential role to reducing barriers to travel and leveraging new technologies to make travel safer and more efficient. However, despite the critical importance of this role, especially as the tourism industry continues to face significant challenges amid global uncertainty, the position remains vacant. Moreover, there is currently no Deputy Assistant Secretary for Travel and Tourism in place either. As a result, the National Travel and Tourism Office is led today by an acting Deputy Assistant Secretary, further underscoring the leadership gap in the space. And so it all means that tourism remains a sub-office, although critical to our national economy, remains a sub-office overseen by the Assistant Secretary for Industry and Analysis, position for which you are nominated, rather than by a new Assistant Secretary dedicated solely to focusing on the ecosystem. And it is an ecosystem. It's weather, it's infrastructure, it's workforce, it's broadband. We could go on, but someone who really focuses on this strategy for our economic growth. So Mr. Haynes, fully implementing the Omnibus Travel and Tourism Act, filling these key leadership roles are essential to strengthening our travel and tourism sector, our business sector. So can you speak to the importance of prioritizing travel and tourism, the substantial benefits the tourism industry provides, the economic impact tourism, business travel provides, and how will you support that if confirmed, and until such time we can get an Assistant Secretary for Travel and Tourism?
Thank you, Senator Rosen. I knew I could expect a...
I wasn't sure who that question was for, but I'm not sure. Okay, so she's asking a question pertaining to tourism for industrial and in industrial analysis. Okay, that's fair. Anyway, yeah, that's yeah, if you guys have any questions about like civics and stuff, I'm not the most well versed in it, but I'm pretty good at understanding how it works. Especially if you're not from the U.S. If you have questions, now's the time to ask. How's the hearing so far? Not bad, Xerox. Honestly, it's really
Discovery.
Rook has been fine. There's a couple people that have pressed him. A couple of senators have really kind of pushed his buttons, but that should be expected from a Senate confirmation meeting. I'm not 100% sure what the line of questioning from certain senators were, or why they would care, but some of them do make sense. We could talk more about that later if you want. Hey, Scary. Tier 2, 109 months. SDS 109, good mission. Hubble servicing mission. March 2002, Columbia to the Hubble Space Telescope in higher orbit. Badass flight back when NASA was badass. NASA's still pretty good, man. Could be better, though. If Rook gets nominated, I'm sure we'll see some pretty exciting changes here. Mr. Haynes is a second candidate, Roxic. So Senate confirmation meetings often have 2, maybe sometimes 3 candidates. It's not just for one person. He is nominated for a position for the Secretary of Commerce pertaining to industrial analysis. So he is looking to do supply chain analyzation for the U.S. That's what he's looking to do, or at least that's what as far as I know. I'm not too well versed in what that actually is and what it does. Like, I understand industrial analysis, but I don't know particularly what his position pertains to. No, Roxic, not for NASA, for the U.S. as the whole. The Secretary of Commerce is different than NASA. So it is an entirely different part of the executive government. This is just how they do things, man. Last time, Rook's first confirmation, there was I forget who else was there. I think it was a nominated position for the Federal Communications Commission, if I'm remembering correctly. That I could be wrong. I'd have to go look. I really hope Rook is very public with what he does. He has to be, Trey. Don't you need to push buttons to get things done? Yeah, Clayton, I just... Yeah. Yes, you do. That's the short answer. It depends. This is not... Oh, hold on.
As a slight in any form or fashion. So I have been a strong supporter of the growing West Virginia, we talked about this, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Ohio space economy for many years, and believe that this region, perhaps best known for its energy and infrastructure prowess, has a unique opportunity to emerge as a leader in space energy and infrastructure. So Mr. Isaacson is someone who's built successful businesses in Pennsylvania. What role do you see for states like Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Ohio working regionally that can share the space and technology attributes that are not in Texas, Alabama, Florida, California? I'm glad Senator Cruz is not here, in shaping the future of America's space ambitions.
Senator, I really appreciate the question. Certainly, as a resident of Pennsylvania, I'd love nothing more than to see more of our students who graduate go in fields that are relevant to aerospace. But I've said many times, I mean, in order to deliver on NASA's world-changing mission, it's going to require contributions from the best and brightest around the nation. So all those states you mentioned before are certainly incredibly important. They have centers that are located in them that contribute greatly to NASA's mission. But we are going to need an incredibly growing workforce over the years that's going to come from across the nation.
I like the answer, the Keystone Space Collaborative, which is what I was talking about. I think also when you have centers of excellence around and participating in the manufacturing or the technology or innovation, it inspires the next generation. You can have cooperative agreements, internships, and other things to get that next generation. I would note, yesterday I was sent a letter that was sent to the chairman and ranking member where numerous former astronauts spoke in favor of your nomination. I think when you and I spoke before, I spoke about one in particular that I have great admiration for, and I saw her name on the list, Peggy Whitson. So that's good enough for me. She is a remarkable astronaut woman and an inspiration to generations. And she came to West Virginia with me, and our young girls were just awestruck by her. So congratulations on securing that letter. That I think that goes a long way. I want to talk about IV&V. That is located in the Katherine Johnson it's not in Parkersburg, in Bridgeport. Katherine Johnson IV&V facility. As you know, this does the independent verification and validation. There's always this sort of looming threat that all of this is going to get privatized. I would certainly argue for that facility being very cost-effective, efficient, and the capabilities are tremendous there. I would like to talk to you about this in greater depth when your nomination is positively affirmed by this Senate. By looking to not outsource what they do, but to maybe grow that presence. And so would you be willing to work with me on this?
Absolutely, Senator, and also very, very grateful that a astronaut Hall of Famer like Peggy signed the letter of support. It means so much, along with all the other 35 astronauts who signed it. I'm very interested in taking that visit, ma'am. Because I think in a world that we all envision someday in the future with lots of space stations and deep space missions, the reliance traditionally on mission control and hardware will diminish as we need to have more onboard decision-making and perhaps even the inclusion of AI onto some of our vehicles and even satellites, which will only increase the importance in terms of the integrity of the software. So I think it will obviously have a continuing role to support NASA, but perhaps many other agencies within the government as well.
Good. Yeah, we've been trying to expand that. I would just very quickly, and this is not a short answer kind of question, but as we see the pursuit of our space program and others around the world, the Chinese in particular, to try to get back to the moon. There's a lot of discussion on power generation on the moon. And
I don't know what your thoughts are here. I don't know if lunar surface power programs, I know it's talked about nuclear, but also solar. I mean, what are your ideas here, and how far along are we on this?
Okay.
Senator, so I love this topic, so I could far exceed our time here. So I want to offer up, I would welcome any opportunity to discuss further, but I'm very big in nuclear and space. I mean, there are numerous applications for it. There's propulsion applications with nuclear electric, nuclear thermal propulsion. There's surface power requirements. We're going to need surface power, for applications that don't have direct sun exposure. We're going to need surface power to likely manufacture propellant for missions to and from Mars, and certainly deeper space exploration missions where there's less solar effectiveness. So it's an area that I think is squarely within NASA's mission to be working on the near impossible, to do what no one else can do, and attract the talent that will want to work on exciting mini Manhattan Project-like programs.
Thank you. Thank you both, and
Great
thank you
answer.
both for your willingness
Perfect.
to serve.
Perfect.
Thank you, Senator Capito.
Mr. Hickenlooper.
Let me start
What
with
a
Mr.
name.
Haynes. I appreciate we followed the discussions around critical minerals. I want to make.
Okay. Yeah, I think Rook is doing just fine. He's doing just fine thus far. Do you like science? Yeah, STX, I couldn't figure out what that guy was getting at. I'm not 100% sure. Like, obviously, the answer to those questions are going to be yes. I think those questions were... I don't know. It's hard to say. Yeah, Ed Markey is there. He spoke already. I'm not sure he provided anything of substance, but I'm not going to say that he shouldn't ask those questions either. I'm not going to say nothing. I think what he said in his line of examination is pretty much self-evident as to how he did, What question would I ask Rook? What does NASA look like in 15 years? What does it look like? I interpreted those questions as slams against RFK Jr. Yeah, Cornholio, I think that line of questioning for will you support the congressional budget when it comes to science? Will you support the congressional budget from science? I'm pretty sure he was asking those questions as obviously the answer is yes. I think he's asking those questions as a hedge in case a midterm election happens and Congress potentially gets a majority that disagrees with the executive. That would be my guess. But once again, that's a guess. I don't want to get into the weeds here with, I think it's this, and this. I don't know. I don't know enough about political science. I'm just trying to think of why you would want to get that on testimony, on a congressional testimony. And the only thing I can really think of is there could be a potentially scenario where Congress and where the legislative branch and the executive branch don't agree about NASA funding. That would be my guess. Oh, here we go.
You answered some of our written questions. I thought this was very well stated, so I repeat it, that you want NASA to be a force multiplier for science, which I think is essential, launching more missions, more telescopes, more probes, more rovers. You also said that you can be expected to be a passionate advocate for science. All of NASA's science and exploration missions, including both planetary and earth sciences, prioritizing these efforts is not about choosing one over the other, but rather identifying where the greatest breakthroughs are possible. Certainly now you're dealing with a budget issue that's fairly dramatic. So I wanted to see how you balance that. Can you confirm, where you believe NASA's scientific and exploration missions, are they complementary, or do they end up becoming, because of budget issues, mutually exclusive?
Ooh, that's a good question. That's
Well,
a really good
Senator,
question.
First, I think the scientific side of NASA is just as important as human exploration, as is our work in aeronautics and technology development. I think that, as I mentioned to some of the other senators before, I understand earlier this year we had a presidential budget request. Of course, I do absolutely support the president in the goal of reducing the deficit and ensuring the nation's on good footing. But that said, a lot has changed since then. I mean, and this is something that if I am confirmed, I'd love to get my arms around because we have been on a continuing resolution. I mean, earlier this year, I understood that perhaps even the Nancy Grace Roman telescope might launch under initial budget requests. I've since been informed that that is no longer the case. So simply put, Senator, I'd love to know where we stand today. But as I've told other senators, you know, in terms of dollars allocated from Congress, we will absolutely maximize the scientific value of every one of them.
Sure, I appreciate that. And the Nancy Grace Roman telescope is a good example. Is Goddard Space Flight Center in a similar position in terms, I know that they're looking at certain potentially draconian changes to their budget?
I mean, Senator, I'm nothing more than I would read the same things that other people do. If you ask me, I think Goddard is very important to spearheading the scientific efforts of NASA.
Right, great. We agree. I appreciate that, and I do recognize is the difficult choices that tight budgets create for all of you, and appreciate that. I'm out of time, even though now I'm left to be the chair. I think the compulsion is that I have to curtail my questions, but I have a couple more questions I'm going to submit in writing to you guys. And again, I appreciate both of your willingness to serve the country in these roles. So Mr. Isaacman and Mr. Haynes, my last question, which I am not just allowed but required to ask of all nominees, if confirmed, do you pledge to work collaboratively with this committee to provide thorough and timely responses to this committee's requests and to appear before the committee when requested?
Yes, Senator.
Yes, Senator. I don't think NASA can accomplish its world-changing mission without the support of Congress.
Right. Well, I think it has to be a close partnership, especially all the more so in these days of tight budgets. So thank you. I have literally dozens of letters of support from various organizations for both of your nominations. And we ask unanimous consent these letters be inserted into the hearing record without objection, so ordered. It's hard to have any objections when you control the room. Senators will have until the close of business on December 4th to submit additional questions for the record. The nominees will have until 11 a.m. on December 7th to respond to those questions. That's a pretty quick turnaround, but hopefully that doesn't put you in too difficult a position. That will conclude today's hearing. The committee stands adjourned.
I think he'll get it, guys. He'll get it. Yeah, he's got this. I'm pretty sure that. Yeah, I mean, you don't want to count your chickens before they hatch, but yeah, he'll be fine. That's good. Real good. Looks like way less objections than last time. Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Let's hope they don't wait too long to vote. I've heard that it should be next week, Bozo, but that was just, that's an unsubstantiated source. I don't know for sure. No one is changing their vote from last time. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe he did. Maybe it's possible he, it's possible he changed some people's minds, which is great. Did you read the whole Athena document? I intended to, but never got to it. No, I did not. Okay, this is going to sound stupid, but Laz, I didn't really make Project Athena. So what is Project Athena? Project Athena is kind of a paper that kind of collects Jared Isaacman's thoughts. It was intended in Rook's own words as being a kind of living, breathing document to basically figure out what NASA should be doing. It's call it a research paper, so to speak, not necessarily a plan of action. A first draft to a thesis, if you will. The fact that it's living and breathing, and the fact that it's not like literally at the beginning, in like the first paragraph of the paper, it says that this is just kind of what I think right now. This is all subject to change. Really, kind of doesn't warrant much effort to read the whole thing. Like, why read it? It's all subject to change. Got stuck doing something for work. Missed if you answered. So if they say yes, he is the administrator, what would be the first 3 things you would like to see him do? Nothing. Okay, this is going to sound dumb, goalie. Nothing. The first 3 things, nothing, nothing, and nothing. You have to get you can't just go into NASA and just start pulling levers left and right. And I think Rook knows that, for what it's worth. You can't do that. You have to get a bearing on where NASA's at, what they're doing, how they function, et cetera, et cetera. And that's something that you can kind of write your ideas about. Project Athena is a good example of this. But it's much more about understanding where NASA's at. And, you don't go into a big organization like that and just start rocking the boat, right? And I think Rook understands that as a CEO. Like, the best thing to do would be to establish the NASA's stakeholder expectations. Stakeholder expectations are basically, what does the president want to do, and how does Congress want to fund it? And then kind of work from there. I would do nothing for a little while. He's been talking to people within NASA for months. Yeah, but there's being outside of and then being on the job. Those are 2 different things, Hellfish. Observe, get a baseline, speak to people. Yeah, Alleviate, I'm with you on that one. You mean you shouldn't renege on Moonlander contracts? Yeah, see, that binary, that's what I mean about pulling levers. I don't think that was a smart thing to do from Sean Duffy, and nor do I think an interim acting administrator should be able to do that with a contract that is a mainline prime contractor for NASA's return to the moon. I think that was a very, 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 very naive thing to do. And that's not to say the reason isn't because I, oh, how dare you pull it on SpaceX? No. I know I'm wearing a Falcon 9 shirt. I get it. The reason why that's a bad thing is because no one is going to want to work with NASA if you win a contract and then NASA just decides they don't want you to do it anymore. That's a really awful precedent to set for an agency that is kind of pivoting to commercial procurement. That's a really bad thing to do. It's not the question. The reason why I have a problem with that really doesn't, it's not, whether SpaceX will beat Blue Origin to the moon. That's not the reason to have a problem with that. The reason to have a problem with that is because you're reneging on an awarded contract, and you're doing it under the premise of SpaceX being behind schedule. Now, to be very fair, SpaceX is behind schedule with Starship program. The Starship program, Block 2 did not do what they wanted it to do. There should be fixes with Block 3. That remains to be seen. It's not whether, but if, honestly, the other thing that I don't like is that it seems to be very subjective application of the law, of NASA's policy. Reopening up the HLS contract just because SpaceX is a little behind is, I think, a fair thing to do. However, I would want equal application of this equal application of this precedent being applied to all contractors. Long story short, is SpaceX behind on Starship? Yeah, absolutely. Oh yeah, you don't build the most complicated, fully reusable launch vehicle in the history of mankind and get it done lickety-split. Like, this takes time. See this picture behind me? This takes time. That takes time. It's a complicated thing to do. The space shuttle over there, which is arguably just as complicated, that took a decade to make that thing work. You know, it's going to take some time, right? And even then, you could argue they didn't work out all the kinks in the design, but I'd say that's a programmatic management problem, not necessarily a design problem. I don't have a problem with NASA wanting to pull the contract for a commercial competition when a contractor gets a little bit behind. However, sorry, this was supposed to be the short story. The short story is that SpaceX is behind on HLS and they're behind on Starship. But if NASA got cold feet every time a contractor got behind, we would be constantly vying for contracts left and right and nothing would actually get done. Sometimes because this is complicated stuff, it does take time. You don't know how long it's going to take. Nobody's ever tried to make this before. Nobody ever tried to make a space shuttle before. You got to remember that the space shuttle right here on my screen behind there, that was a first attempt at a reusable vehicle. That was the first attempt. That's pretty damn good for a first attempt. The Saturn V, nobody had tried to do that before. You know, this stuff does take time. Has there actually been a project other than Apollo that was finished on time? Gemini, Mercury. TDRS, with the exception of the space shuttle of Challenger. Does this give Jared the option to redo the SLS contract? I think he is unfortunately locked in to SLS to at least Artemis 5. Now, yeah. We can talk more about that later. This is what grinds your gears. They are behind, so they open it for rebirth. Yet Starliner, Dream Chaser, exactly, Binary. Selective application of this is really not a good precedent to set. That's what I mean. I don't get mad at Sean Duffy for opening up the HLS contract because I take it as some slight towards SpaceX. I have a problem with it. And, you know, like, if Blue sends something to the moon before them, that'd be hilarious, dude. I want them to do that. That'd be great. Nothing would light a fire under their tail better. However, it's not so much about SpaceX versus Blue Origin, whereas it's selective application, right? And this is what I mean about pulling levers at NASA. At face value, it seems like what Sean Duffy did was a really smart thing. Oh yeah, we're leveraging commercial contracts, you know, competition. That's the American way. No, that's not. This was a contract that was awarded and won. You're reneging on that. That's not competition. That's fixing the competition. That's, you know, paid off referees. That's what that is. That's an awful precedent to set. And the fact that it's selectively only enforced against SpaceX, Jim did the same thing with Dragon. He did the same thing with the DM2 mission in 2019. Or, well, not the DM2 mission. He did the same thing with Commercial Crew in 2019. He held SpaceX's feet to the fire, saying, like, look, you guys can't be working on Starship. You have to work on Falcon 9 and Dragon so we can get American astronauts from American soil. And I didn't think much of it at the time. I was like, oh yeah, that's kind of a smart thing to do. But where is this? Why does NASA choose to be like this with commercial contractors, but their own in-house stuff, which is at this point, I'm not going to say decades behind, but SLS's first launch, when the program was thought up, the first launch was supposed to be in November of 2017. That's when Artemis 1 was supposed to go. Artemis 1 didn't fly until 2022. Now, once again, you could make the argument that this stuff does take time, right? It does take time, and it's the aerospace industry. You don't know how long it's going to take until you do it. That's a really important thing to understand. However, it seems like there's selective application of like the letter of the law between, certain prime contractors. And I don't like that. I really don't like it. I don't think that's not a good precedent to set. That's not how NASA should be run. Are there penalties built into the contracts? It depends on the contracting structure, Lord Gugu. It depends. It's not so much that you get penalized for the contract that if you don't complete scheduling milestones, you don't get a bonus. Like, there is a financial incentive to complete this stuff on time. And I think that's an important thing to understand. The SLS program has financial incentives to complete stuff on time. There are milestones in the project. But here's the thing. Boeing, in certain parts of the contract, Boeing was rewarded with these financial bonuses because stuff was getting done on time with the core stage. That's weird. I'm not sure why you would pay somebody for failing, but that seems to be the case. This is from multiple Office of Investigator General reports and government accountability reports. Yeah, outdoorsman, exactly. That's why I don't like that. Here, I'm going to turn on Starbase Live so the headset doesn't time out. One could argue SLS still isn't ready with a heat shield that isn't fully tested yet. Yeah, Laz, I got into a pretty good civil, albeit civil, discussion with viewers, with Vulcan, a longtime viewer on the stream about this the other day. I really look. Is NASA taking an elevated risk with this heat shield that hasn't been fully qualified nor understood? Yes. Is NASA's analysis in this matter for Artemis 2 probably pretty good? Yes. Would they put people on Artemis 2 if they weren't as sure as they possibly could be? I don't know, man. If you wanted to be absolutely sure, you'd make sure that heat shield works with nobody on board. But that doesn't seem to be the case here. So either NASA is very, very sure that the heat shield's not going to spall or char or anything, or they're taking a heightened risk. Personally, with me, if I was running the program, and this is not a slight against Orion, I like Orion. I think it's a great capsule. This is not a slight against it. I think Orion offers tremendous capability if you can get this heat shield dialed in. However, if it was me, okay, I get it. Kerbal isn't real life, but say we were playing Kerbal. Say we were. Would we test a heat shield with people on it for the first time? No. You would only do that unless you absolutely have to. You'd only do that if you absolutely have to do it. A past anecdote would be the space shuttle. The space shuttle had a stakeholder expectation that it needed to fly with crew. So naturally, the first launch had people on it. That was the first time test of the first time all up test of a 30,000 tile heat shield system that they weren't sure if it was gonna work, but they were pretty sure, and it worked. That doesn't mean that STS-1 wasn't without its follies, though. Oh yeah, outdoorsman? Oh, nice. Oh yeah, I see the crane basket. Nice. Good stuff. If I was testing a heat shield in Kerbal, and this is in Kerbal, this is in a video game, I would test it with nobody on board. We did. We tested our Taurus capsule many times without people on board to get the entry correct and make sure that we understood exactly what that heat shield was doing. And even now, every time in Kerbal, when I re-enter that capsule, I always make sure it re-enters in the exact same way, from the exact same orbit, almost every time. And that's how I know that nothing's going to go wrong. There's going to be no weird behavior. We separate the service module at the exact same time, same way, enter the capsule at the exact same heading, do the exact same maneuvers, and I know it's going to come down exactly where it came down from that first test. People are talking next to CP11. I can hear them. That's funny. Some senators have stated they want Jared in charge of NASA by the end of next week. Yeah, I think they're going to vote on it sooner rather than later. How did they test the shuttle heat shield tiles before STS-1? There's no way. That's what I mean, outdoorsman. There's no way to test the all-up system as a whole. You can test individual tiles or segments. The re-entry, guys, is one of the hardest things to analyze and take into account. That's why I wasn't surprised when there was charring and spalling, even on Artemis 1, EFT-1. That's always going to happen. But the key is to make sure that it happened in a way that you predicted. That's what's really important about test flights. Test flights aren't just, unless you're SpaceX, which is very much just send it and see what happens and record your findings and go. How it's kind of done in a more, let's say, traditional aerospace environment is you do your analysis. You try to figure out exactly what this heat shield is going to do, right? Think of it like writing an essay and then turning in a thesis statement and then waiting for the grade. If you know you did a good job, and you got a good grade, you got what you expected. You know you did a good job, you're probably going to get a good grade, right? In this case, the person grading your exam is the laws of physics, right? So you do your analysis on the heat shield. You would do as much as you possibly can. Learn as much as you possibly can and test it in every way, shape, and form possible that you can think of without actually flying it. And then your test flight isn't so much a test to figure out what happened, like, oh, let's observe the results. Oh, this happened in a way that we didn't understand. No, it's very much a final exam. This capsule went through re-entry. Does the analysis match the flight result? And in the case of Artemis 1, it didn't. It did not match the flight result. It was very, very off by a significant margin. Even NASA admits that. The amount of charring and spalling that happened on a blocked Avcoat heat shield was way higher than what NASA expected. That is bad analysis. That means you didn't understand what you were doing. Now, to be 100% fair, nobody can predict the future. This is a newer technology. We've never used a blocked Avcoat heat shield with Orion in this application before. We've never done that. So you're going to get a surprise. There's no way to test this on the ground. And nobody's done this type of re-entry trajectory since 1972, and that was with a heat shield that had a different mechanical architecture. So it's not without surprises. But that should have been understood, and that should have been known. And that is where my problem, that's what my problem is. It's, oh yeah, it'll be fine. No. Oh yeah, it'll be fine doesn't work. That heat shield needs to be, that heat shield and your analysis on the heat shield needs to be 100% correct, and it needs to go through a final exam. You don't take a final exam on a course in college. You don't miss a final exam on a course in college and pass. You're not getting your diploma if you don't pass your final exams. NASA's very much not abiding by their own instituted systems engineering rules. And that's where my problem lies. Now, once again, in the discussion that we had the other day, I had a discussion with a couple of viewers, a couple of good buddies of mine in chat. The astronauts are okay with flying it. And I guess if the astronauts are okay with flying it, then I don't have a problem with it. If you're willing to accept that elevated risk. You know, but there's been times where in the past with the space program where the elevated risks were very poorly communicated to astronauts. And we ended up paying for that. They ended up paying for that. So, you know, just something to keep in mind. Anyway. Okay, any other questions about civics and stuff? Hey, Formula Fan, I heard that they hope to fly to the moon next year in February, if that's true. That's the Artemis 2 mission. That's the mission we're talking about. Yep. The real reason Artemis 2 is happening with people right now is money and time, not confidence in the mission. And that's exactly it, Lazarus. I very much think that NASA is letting the lack of hardware and the race to the moon cloud their judgment. At least, I can't prove it, obviously. And are there people smarter at NASA that would say that I'm wrong? Yes, absolutely. I don't know for sure. What I'm saying is that per even NASA's own systems engineering, they are breaking their own rules. Could it be fine? Sure. Are there people at NASA that understand this better than me? Yes. Are there people that work on heat shields that are way smarter than me? Oh, absolutely. I think NASA's, and that's what I mean. You should have known that a new heat shield with a new design is you're going to get some unknown unknowns, because this is just uncharted territory. There's no people here that worked on the Apollo heat shield. There's some of them still around, but the technicians that actually put the thing together, that made the changes and modifications to make the heat shield safe after Apollo 4, Apollo 5, Apollo 6, Apollo 7, Apollo 8, they're not around. This might as well be a new endeavor at this point. That should have been known and understood. We should have known that we're not going to get it right the first time. And that, once again, an architectural problem with SLS from a programmatic standpoint is my issue. The plain English way of saying that is that SLS, you need more SLSs. If NASA had bought 5 or 6 SLS Block 1 instead of SLS Block 1s with Orion instead of 3, this wouldn't be an issue. It wouldn't be an issue at all. It wouldn't jeopardize the mission at all. And I know what people are going to say. Well, EJ, that's expensive, isn't it? Yeah, but getting the heat shield right is kind of important. If you say at this point that buying more space launch systems is too expensive for NASA to do, right? You're inadvertently kind of putting a price on the four astronauts that are going to fly, Reed, Victor, Christina, and Jeremy. You're putting a price on that, and I don't think that's smart. That's the kind of stuff that led to Apollo 1 to be 100% real. That's what happened. That's how that panned out. They wanted to go with a pure O2 environment at a certain pressure inside of the Block 1 Apollo CSM, and we paid for that. The reason why we wanted to do that is because it would have been easier to get it done, and we would have gotten it done faster because we're in a race. That is the exact reason why Apollo 1 happened. Okay. The other thing is that NASA thought they knew everything about the tiles until STS-107. Yeah, bad analysis. That's right. You should never stop with this. How do you know that this heat shield in this capacity is only flown once, and then you yourselves are redesigning it after this? The Artemis 3 Orion heat shield is redesigned to supposedly deal with these changes. I like how you're redesigning to changes that you don't even know are going to work. Once again, this is very much violating your own NASA's own rule set of systems engineering and milestone development. You it's a glaring red flag. Hopefully you had a good trick. You look so formal today. Well, I was trying to look good for the Senate confirmation meeting, We did the try not to rage challenge, and it worked. We didn't get mad. All right. I got a little peeved at some things, but whatever. Yeah, confirmation went well, Tessa. I think Rook will. He'll get it. I'm pretty sure he'll get it. I hope he does. I really do. Hey, Galax, what's up? I saw a lot of people have questions about civics. Do you guys want me to go through how NASA works in the applications of federal government? I can teach you that if you want. It's because you got all the rage out last night. There is a method to my madness, Hellfish. I don't have a problem with suppressors. But seriously, though. When is the vote? It should be next week, King. Yep. Mm-hmm. The Senate's probably going to want to do this quickly. Now, actually, a good question that I did see some people ask. Does it usually take this long to confirm somebody? The incumbent president has been there for, what is it, a year almost at this point? 11 months. Does it usually take this long? No. This is usually a process that takes a couple of months at best. The reason why this one has taken so long is because Jared Isaacman had the nomination back in January of this year. He had the nomination, and his nomination was pulled a day before the Senate was going to vote on him. The reason why it was pulled was because, and once again, I'm just telling you what happened. I'm not trying to have any axe to grind here. The president and Elon Musk were very, very tight going through the 2024 election, for whatever reason. I mean, I'm sure you guys know. Just not trying to, rock the boat here. They did have a disagreement in terms of how the government procures stuff and spends money. And Elon got mad at the president. The president got mad at him. They're two dudes that seem very, very stubborn about things. So they had a little bit of a spat, and Elon divested himself of politics for a little while. That, because of this, I don't think it's any secret that Elon did recommend Jared Isaacman as NASA administrator, at least in some capacity. And that explains Senator Markey's line of questioning in the last one and this one. Now, because of this, advisors in the White House, without Elon being there, because they didn't like him, certain advisors championed against the president pulling the nomination for, I don't know what the stakeholder reasons are. Probably because they don't like him. Elon is a very stubborn dude. We've seen that. He's a very stubborn guy. He's very persistent. You don't have to like him to understand that. And because of this, the nomination was pulled. Now, fast forward to a couple months ago. Okay, I'm just telling this factually. I don't like pushing these buttons on stream. I'm just telling you to give you guys an understanding of what's going on. A conservative political pundit named Charlie Kirk was shot. He was assassinated when he was giving a speech at a university. And that was the impetus for Elon to start talking with the president again about stuff. And the president reinstated Jared Isaacman. He reinstated his nomination for Jared Isaacman shortly after that. Now, whether that's causation or correlation, I don't know. I think it's just something to mention as a point of fact, without trying to, say like, oh, this is bad. Or this is like, I'm not just trying to tell you what's going on. There was spoiled. That's another thing to mention. The advisor, it was leaked in the press a number of months ago that the advisor that championed for pulling the Isaacman nomination, I was about to say Isaacson. The Isaacman nomination was a White House political advisor by the name of Sergio Gore. And he's the one that championed, no, we got to pull it. Elon's wrong. He has no idea what he's talking about, et cetera, et cetera. Now, keep in mind, this is all anecdotal. We don't know this for sure. He very recently, that does kind of correlate with Isaacman's reinstatement. He got fired. He got fired. And he's no longer a White House advisor. He is the White House ambassador to India, if I'm remembering correctly. Yeah? Okay, cool. I'm trying to stay out of the discussion. I've already been yelled at. Remember, the title of this stream is Try Not to Rage. Hey, if I'm doing it, if I'm doing it and not getting mad, you guys can do it too. Challenge impossible. So far, I think we're doing just fine. Hey, can't see me. What's going on? You went and got married. Woo! Hey, congratulations, dude. Nice. I would lean more to Sean Duffy floating the idea of merging NASA into the Department of Transportation. Yeah. That's right. In lieu of Isaacman's nomination being pulled, the president appointed an interim acting administrator, which he can do. You don't need a vote for that. He wanted Sean Duffy, who is the Secretary of Transportation, to head that. And yeah, I already talked in pretty good detail about why that was probably not the smartest decision. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I will admit I raged twice with the stupid questioning about meetings, not actually about space or NASA. I will take an L. Learn from the experience and get better. How'd the rage go? I didn't get mad. Bree. I let certain senators' questions speak for themselves. I didn't say a word. You guys form your own opinions. Yeah, and it was about 2 hours. That was actually a pretty long meeting. Yeah, about 2 hours. That's good. That's, you know. With that being said, you know, kind of just to speak to the more opinion things, I don't like that the chairman of this committee left halfway through it after all their questions were done. I don't like that. I don't like that. This is a confirmation meeting for important positions in the executive branch of the government. They warrant your attention, in my opinion. With that being said, I don't know how DC works, dude. I have no idea. It just seems like that, you know, what do you have better to do? You go talk to some interns or something? This is 2025. We don't form our own opinions. We let the internet tell us what to think. Oh, yeah. Well, I'm telling you to think for yourself. Yeah. This statement is false. Boom. Now what? I'm on the internet. Does that help? If I can. There was also other members who left the room too for phone calls. Yeah, I don't know how to feel about that. Oh yeah, you like that, NX? It's pretty good, right? Yeah, Clayton, exactly. You're there. You're at least with like Ted Cruz, like you're the chairman of this. And then I think Senator Cantwell is the ranking member. Like you guys just left. You just left. Bro, this is your party. You're the ranking member and the chair. Like you just left? Like does this happen? Something tells me that this happens a lot. You know? Honestly, it does. I come here to make sure I'm sane. There you go. This happens all the time. Yeah, I don't like that. I'm on Hawaii time, just woke up. Was the hearing an absolute clusterfuck? Actually, it wasn't too bad, Nader. Yeah, it wasn't too bad. I didn't particularly understand some senators' line of questioning in the applications of nomination. Like I'm not really understand. And believe it or not, Ed Markey was not one of them. I know it was pretty straightforward what he was trying to do. But yeah, some line of questioning I really didn't pertain to application not in my opinion. It really didn't seem to. But I didn't say nothing. I didn't say nothing. I think the last Senate confirmation meeting, I got really pissed off. I got really pissed off at senator from my state. I got pissed off at the dude. You know what? It's not. It's if we're gonna cover this, dude. It is not. I'm not here to tell you how to think. I'm here to teach. I'm here to teach you how to think. All right. So my reactions mean nothing. They should mean nothing. So I think it's important to be stoic, just as a teacher. You know what I mean? With that being said, not bad, dude. Really not bad. I think he'll get the nomination. I really do. He'll get it. These committee hearings are just for sound bites, nothing more. No, it's to get cross-examination on the congressional record. That's the point of it. You could say sound bites. I would say the senators are trying to get Isaacman to say things to be able to hold him accountable. And to be honest, guys, like the truth of the matter is that I don't have a problem with that. I really don't. I really don't. I do not have a problem with this. That's what this meeting is for. Now, see, the thing is, I just... Yeah, yeah. Like, the thing is, it's just some of them I don't really understand what their line of like what they were trying to get at. Like Senator Kim was asking questions about climate science, and he referenced Project Athena, which is Rook's kind of living document about what he thinks about NASA. That was leaked in the press a couple of months ago, and it says, you know, potentially cutting funding for NASA's science. Now, Senator Kim basically said, oh, this document says you're going to cut science. Are you going to cut science? And Rook basically said, like, look, I don't know. I stand by everything that was in that document, but I don't know. It kind of depends. I need to figure out what's going on here. Probably not. But I got to figure out what's going on. Like, I don't understand that line of questioning there. I mean, I guess it's important to have that as an additional addendum to, you know, to be on the congressional record. Like, fellas, let me explain. What do I mean about congressional record? So, these Senate meetings are, and subsequent cross-examination is there to get your saying into words, like as a notarized statement for Congress. Now, what does that mean? What does notarization mean? That means, this basically means that you have to tell the truth in these. If you do not tell the truth, and you commit to a certain statement, like say Rook said, like, I want to cancel everything and I want to start over. And somebody asked him about it in a meeting and he said, did you say this? If he said no on the congressional record, what that's called is perjury. You can't lie on a congressional record. If you do, they will go after you. Now, that hopefully provides context to some of the cross-examination questions that were done here. You can't lie on a congressional record. You shouldn't lie in any court. Does it happen? Probably. Don't know. Innocent until proven guilty, right? That's how our whole system works. This is why I don't recall is so popular. You know, I don't recall these events at this time. Yeah, exactly. It's a very important process. The rule of law is super important, Baranok, exactly. And dude, as much as I just want a space technocracy like running the, you know, just running wild and throughout the solar system, I hold checks and balances and process above that. I really do. Like, that's something that I personally take very seriously. And that's why, you know, dress like I'm there, because we're there. We're stakeholders here. This is important to understand. Were they sworn in at the beginning? Most likely. Fluffy, we didn't see that, though. How long can an acting administrator for NASA hold the position? Indefinitely, Max, yeah. It's up to the government to appoint somebody. So Sean Duffy has been doing that for months now. Dressed to the Falcon 9s. That's right. Yeah, outdoorsman, once again, the rule of law supersedes any want that I have for us to go into space. We don't function, our space program can't happen if people don't observe the law. That's important to understand. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It sounds like Athena was a 65-page list of contingency plans. They're all potentially valid, but you don't follow every contingency check if things are going well or events don't trigger. Yeah, exactly. It's just his analysis on where NASA stands. It's just him organizing his thoughts. It was always subject to change. It says it in like the first part of that the paper itself. So using that, and that's what I mean about not understanding what Senator Kim's line of questioning, unless it was to get him to say, like, no, this can change, this is subject to change, which I don't think that's what he was trying to do. I think he missed the point, personally. that he used it as some way to get Jared Isaacman to admit that cutting science is wrong. Like, okay. That's weird. Did they talk about the ISS? It was mentioned in a small bit of it, Sig, but not like much in detail, to be honest with you. Also, questions about potential conflict of interest are important and needed. Yeah, for sure, Baron. Like, yes. Mm-hmm. So you can't vote for a new one? It's up to the Senate to do that. So the NASA, okay, the leader of NASA, so that's the NASA administrator position. That's the person that's running NASA. They are not a cabinet position in the president. The cabinet is basically serves right under the president in the executive branch of the United States. The NASA administrator does fall under that blanket, but it's not a cabinet position. The president will pick cabinet positions. Sometimes you don't need a confirmation for that. Sometimes you do. It really depends. But with the NASA administrator, because NASA throws a lot of money around, NASA's a pretty big operation. It's to the tune of $25 billion. That is not an inconsequential sum. Because of this, the Senate nominates the Senate confirms the NASA administrator. So the president will pick somebody, and then the Senate will make sure that the person that the president picked is the best to carry out the goals. At least this is how it should work on paper. The goals of what the branch, the executive branch wants to do. Now, it's important to understand from a civics standpoint that the executive branch of the United States, so the president, and specifically the vice president and the National Space Council, do denote NASA's plans. That is important to understand. How the system works as current is the president picks what NASA gets to do. The president could just say, I don't want to do any of this. That's happened in the past. It happened with Apollo. And it happened with Constellation. I don't want to do any of this. Get rid of it. That does happen. And I would argue that that's very bad. The reason why that's bad is because, well, the president does get to pick NASA's plans and pick an administrator for confirmation by the upper house of Congress, the upper house of the legislative branch of the United States. It is up to the lower house of Congress to basically fund these projects. And this is where this gets a little murky, you know what I mean? So in order to understand this, you need to understand the branches of federal government. There's the executive branch, which is the president and his cabinet and any federal institutions like the post office, NASA, Coast Guard, stuff like that. Technically, the Coast Guard is the Department of Homeland Security, but that's another story. That's that entity. Like that's the head of the commander-in-chiefs of respective departments, and at the top is the president. The president is the commander-in-chief of the U.S. military, et cetera, et cetera. Now that's the executive branch. There's 3 branches total, and they form a triangle of checks and balances. The executive is here. Over here is the legislative branch. The legislative branch at the federal government level, the United States, has 2 houses of Congress. You have an upper and a lower house of Congress. The upper house is senators. Senators, there's 2 representatives from every U.S. state. So there's a senior and a junior senator. There's 50 states, 100 senators. Okay? Senators are voted on by states. They used to be appointed by the governor of every state, which the governor of every state in the United States is the president of either of those states. We just call them governors, not to be confused. So like the governor of Massachusetts is a woman by the name of Maura Healey. She's basically the president of this state. Now, each state does have a slight variation of the federal government system. It varies by state, whatever people wants to vote on. Like if you could change the system if you want, but this system seems to work really well. Now, your senators are in the upper house of Congress. In the lower house of Congress, you have representatives. So in every state, there are what's called congressional districts. These congressional districts are the lines for these congressional districts are drawn up per a survey thing that every U.S. citizen needs to, and potentially non-U.S. citizen needs to do. It's called the census. The census is basically the U.S. saying, okay, how many people are in this country? What demographics are they? Where do they live, et cetera, et cetera. And in order to get good representation in every district, the lines can change on these congressional districts. Now, some people min-max that thing, and that's called gerrymandering, but to get more or less representation. But that's a whole nother story that I won't want to, I don't want to talk about that. Long story short, the congressional districts can change depending on population. So if more people, if there's like mass migration, like a lot of people are moving to Florida, for instance. A lot of people, when I was in high school, a lot of people moved to California because the tech industry was there, because that's where the money is. People move around. There's migration around the United States. People always are leaving and entering states. To make sure that no state gets overrepresented, these censuses go out to make sure that every person in the United States that's a citizen is making sure they have equal representation. There was a whole war 250 years ago that was fought over this. That's kind of important. And then another one after that, 230 years ago? No, 1860. Idiot. 1863. That's a whole nother story. The U.S. Civil War was fought over representation too, partially. That's once again, we could get into the weeds with that if you guys want to, but that's another story. So the representatives, in the lower house of Congress, there's 435 representatives. And now the amount of representatives can change depending on population. I would argue that it should be way higher than that to make sure that everybody gets equal representation at this point, but that is my personal opinion. There's 435 representatives in the lower house of Congress. This lower house of Congress in the legislative branch of the U.S. forms what's called the U.S. House of Representatives. So we have an upper and lower house of Congress in the legislative branch. There's the senators, which there's two that represent the needs of a state at the executive level. And then there's the representatives in the lower house of Congress. The representatives in the lower house of Congress represent what the people want. That is your direct line of direct chain of command from a citizen such as myself, basically right to the higher branches of federal government. Every district in every state has a representative. And these are representatives that they have to be, by law, they have to listen to you. I could call my representative right now if I don't think the space program is doing what I want it to do. Or if I have a vested need in what I want the space program to do, I could call my representative right now. Heck, you could even call senators if you really want to. But technically, senators are there to represent the needs of states at a government level. So think about it like this. Senators represent what a state wants. Representatives represent what a people want in that state, if that makes any sense. This type of government is called representative republic. It's a representative republic. We're a constitutional representative republic in this country. It's not a pure democracy. Pure democracy can potentially, mob rule is not a good way to do things. If you look at France with them testing the waters of democracy, even Greece or the Romans, for an example. Well, the Romans had a representative republic, but that's another story. So this type of systems puts checks and balances on any one particular branch, consolidating power. The reason why they do this, why there's checks and balances on the system, is because the founding fathers of this country, the people that signed the Declaration of Independence in July of 1776, they were worried about this new republic that they were forming basically devolving into a constitutional monarchy, just like Britain. Now, that's not to say that constitutional monarchy is bad. Britain is still a constitutional monarchy to this day. A lot of countries are constitutional monarchies. Japan is, off the top of my head. Now, the third branch of the government is called the judicial branch. That's the court system. The judicial branch is there to make sure that they're there for interpretation of our laws. Okay? The judicial branch at the federal level makes up, I mean, there's definitely a couple of different circuits of circuits of appeals court, et cetera, and I'm not too 100% sure how the whole system of judges work. Long story short, there are Supreme Court justices. There's, how many other now? Oh, balls. I can't believe I forgot this. I have to look at this. I'm very annoyed that I forgot this. Streamer brain, dude. There's 9. Thank you. 9 Supreme Court justices. And what these justices do, the justices are picked by the president and then approved by the Senate, for what it's worth, just like the NASA administrator position is. What these Supreme Court justices do is they vote on, they are there to interpret our constitutional law. They are there to interpret the laws of the land. In court cases, there's always some type of legal avenue that's being pursued. There's appeals, there's changes to the law, there's, asking for a higher ruling on things. That's what the Supreme Court is there for. The Supreme Court will get handed a court case that's been elevated all the way up to the federal level, right? And they are there to interpret the law. And then they will vote on it. That's why there's an odd number. So the Supreme Court doesn't push on an interpretation of the law. It'll always go one way or the other. There'll never be a hung jury, so to speak. So the judicial branch is there to interpret the laws of the land and also make sure that the president is working within the law and Congress is also working within the law, right? The whole system is designed to check itself. The judicial branch is our whole court system. Yes, exactly. They're the courts that interpret the laws of the land. The Supreme Court is just the highest interpreters of the law of the land at the federal level. Every state has a Supreme Court. Massachusetts has its own Supreme Court. California has their own. Texas has their own. There are variations. Like I said, every state, the 50 states in the United States have basically a smaller version of this exact thing. There are variations to it, whether you're a commonwealth or a republic or whatever. The states can vote on how they want to govern themselves. And that is completely different than federal government. For instance, I'll give you an example. In Massachusetts, it is totally legal to smoke weed. You can smoke marijuana, no problem. That's a thing. It's regulated to an extent, just like alcohol would be. In other states, that's not a thing. You can't do that. The laws do change locally. But yeah, that is how our system works. Now, once again, that is a very, very short overview of how this system goes together. That's a very short way there. That's a very short explanation. This is for guys. I'm giving this just in case somebody needed a refresher. I need a refresher myself. I forgot how many Supreme Court justices there were. I'm sorry. That was a really dumb. I can't remember. I remember all this off the top of my head. I did pretty good, right? This is for people that are potentially not from the U.S. And in case anybody needs a refresher, that's why I'm telling you guys this. Now, how that pertains to the NASA administrator is, and how the checks and balances work here, okay, is so the president picks the NASA administrator. They pick the nominee for NASA administrator. So the president picked Jared Isaacman. I think that's a good one. But it's not up to me. That's up to the senators, because the Senate is what confirms them. The Senate will vote on whether this position in the executive branch is somebody that's not going to go off the deep end, for instance, right? Now, once again, just an additional thing with the upper and lower house of Congress, guys. The lower house of Congress, the representatives draft legislature. They're the ones that come up with laws and funding, right? And the Senate is what approves and makes the laws from the lower house. Basically, they sign them into law by voting on them. Once again, it's a whole system of checks and balances to make sure one entity in the federal government doesn't consolidate power. You always have to work with another branch of government, even if you disagree. That's the whole point. Now, are there people in the Senate that like Jared Isaacman? Yes, absolutely. Are there people in the Senate that don't like him? Yes. But remember that the application of this Senate confirmation meeting is to understand where Jared Isaacman stands at the state level pertaining to NASA, right? So the senators there are there to, obviously, they're there to ask, the senators that are on this Commerce, Justice, and Science Committee, it's called CSJ for short, are there to cross-examine the presidential nominee to make sure that they're the right person for the job pertaining to how NASA works with different states and specifically different NASA design, NASA centers around the country. There are design centers in states around the country. There's Goddard in Maryland. There's the Glenn Research Center in Ohio. There's the Draper Lab, which is at MIT. From my state in Massachusetts, some of them are more obvious. There's Kennedy Space Center, that's in Florida. It's kind of obvious what they do. There's Johnson Space Center, which is the home of NASA's flight operations and astronaut training. There's Stennis, which is testing in Mississippi. There's propulsion development being done at Huntsville. That's Marshall Space Flight Center in Alabama. And there's Ames, NASA Ames, that's in Silicon Valley. They do aerodynamic research and computational research for NASA. There's NASA Armstrong, which is home to aeronautical flight testing for NASA. That's at Edwards Air Force Base in Palmdale in California. There's all kinds of centers all over the place. And this confirmation meeting is there to make sure that at the state level that Jared Isaacman knows about this and knows that you're going to use these facilities. They should be in an ideal world, they should be cross-examining Jared Isaacman for, as stakeholders for NASA, they should be cross-examining where his plans are at, or being the administrator pertaining to state level, like state level as opposed to federal. Jet Propulsion Laboratory is also there. That's in Pasadena. That is run by by CIT, by California Institute of Technology. That is a huge NASA stakeholder, just like the Draper Lab is at MIT. NASA has facilities all over, and that's on purpose. Now, why is that on purpose? Well, the president gets to decide what he wants NASA to do, like President Kennedy. Why choose the moon? Why choose this as our goal? President Kennedy said, let's go to the moon. It's up to Congress to figure out how you're going to fund it and sign it into law. It's up to Congress to make sure that what the president proposes is a worthwhile endeavor. Now, in the applications of NASA, the lower house of the legislative branch of the federal government, which is the House of Representatives, is there to draft the legislation for NASA. They're there to, say that the president's like, I want to go to Jupiter. Okay, NASA will figure out a plan for how to do that, and they'll send that to Congress, and Congress will draft law to figure out how to go to Jupiter. Right? Let's go to Jupiter in the next 2 years, which I'm just making up stuff. Jupiter in 2 years, not happening. It'll take 2 years to get there with our current propulsion. Jupiter's a little ways away for us. Not on a cosmic scale, though. It might as well be our backyard. But that's another story. It's up to the lower house of Congress to draft legislature and fund this project. And then it's up to the Senate to make sure, it's up to the Senate to basically sign this legislature into law. and then it should then funds will be appropriated, and you go from there. Oh yeah, Michoud, yeah, in Louisiana, where they make SLS core stages. Yeah, that's kind of important too. I like I said, I knew I forgot something, but what do you think is more beneficial to NASA, JPL or Draper? Pitting facility against facility is a fool's errand, goalie. That's not a good idea. Repost from a while ago. I came in late. I don't fully understand the administration stuff. My two said Isaacman flies MiGs for fun. Get him in there. I think he'll pass Fleiken. I think he'll be just fine. Oh, I see people are turning this into which system is better. Sig, I'm just going to call you out by name. I frankly am not explaining all this for you to sit here and see and discern in your own ways what is better than others. I'm here for you to understand it. I don't really care if you think your system is better. You're not a citizen of this country. And nor am I trying to invite political discourse into figuring out which person thinks their way of government is better. Okay, that's not really the point of this exercise. So please stop. How do colleges get their own research to the ISS or elsewhere? Outdoorsmen, they follow what's called an SBIR, which NASA basically releases things like, oh, you want to do this here. They basically have like job postings, so to speak, called SBIRs that companies or universities can choose to pursue avenues of research. These are denoted from decadal surveys and anything that NASA thinks that needs to be researched. And universities can say, oh, I want to research that. Yeah, let me do that. And you kind of go from there. So Louisiana is the one that builds the SLS stages. That's neat. I thought they did it at the VAB. No, they do it in a facility, a gigantic facility. That's just outside of New Orleans. That's called the Michoud Assembly Facility. It's gigantic. They built Saturn V's there. Yeah. I don't know if you want to do. I don't think the Senate would have something to say about that, Nader, but I appreciate it. Yeah. Is there monetary gain for doing research? Well, yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. NASA, okay, let me just explain. I'm just going to explain once again, just as a refresher, what NASA is supposed to do. NASA's goal when they were founded, when it was not founded, it's not a company. When NASA was started in 1958 by President Eisenhower, he established is the right word. He established NASA with the goal of pursuing civilian avenues of aerospace and aeronautical research for the betterment of the U.S. economy. So, up until a company called SpaceX came around and kind of bucked this whole trend, no company was going to try to build a space shuttle. Boeing is not going to try to do that. I mean, you get what I'm trying to say. There's no real money in trying to make a reusable space vehicle, right? And this is an argument that still goes on to this day, even with SpaceX here. Nobody was going to try to build something like Starlink. Nobody was going to try to build something like Starship. That doesn't make any sense. NASA was there to originally use, albeit small allocation of government money to be able to pursue projects that corporations just frankly couldn't. That's the whole exercise. That's the whole point of this. NASA is there to pioneer aerospace technologies that would be too costly for any startup company to pursue. That is the whole point of NASA. They're there to drive economic sectors in the civilian spaceflight and civilian aerospace industry. I'll give you an example. During the Apollo program, they needed a flight computer on the Saturn V and the Command Service Module and the Lunar Excursion Module that was small enough to be able to make real-time changes to the spacecraft's trajectory. The resulting thing was something from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, particularly the Draper Laboratory, called the Apollo Guidance Computer, the AGC. The AGC is a paradigm shift in how rocket guidance systems worked up until that point. Rocket guidance systems up until that point were either a slew of mechanical gears and computers ticking around inside of a spacecraft on its way, in a rocket on its way up. It basically looked like a Swiss watch. And that ended up being very heavy. It ended up being very high mass. And we know from the rocket equation that a high mass solution to getting your rocket to fly straight is not going to be very efficient, particularly in the application of getting into space. For people that don't know, your spacecraft has to be extremely freaking light. And once again, I say light just to speak it in kind of simpler terms. It's not about weight. It's about mass. You need a very small mass. The reason why is because where rockets fly, where they end up going is weightless. So mass is much more important. You want to have less spacecraft on your spacecraft and less rocket on your rocket and more fuel on your rocket. The more fuel you have, the less rocket you have, the further you're going to go. Pretty straightforward stuff. Up until the Apollo program came around, rockets were either A, remote control. They would seriously have all the computers at the launch site, and they would basically radio control it like how you'd fly a drone around nowadays. Same idea. But in the 50s, a drone has all these little computers on it, right? But remember that it has all these little computers on it. Computers in the 50s and going into the early 60s took up an entire blockhouse, which is
go at throttle up.
Syrian, what's up, man? 128 months, which is why if you look at some of the older pads around the Cape on Google Earth, they have blockhouses. That's where the flight computers were for the vehicle. And they would just beam the commands to the rocket on its way up, right? They would just say, oh, I need you to turn the thrust vanes, turn the fins, or turn in this direction on the way up. And then when it went over the hill, that's it. Now, do you understand why that would be a little bit prohibitive if you were trying to land on the moon? If we had a remote control system for trying to land on the moon, you're not going to be able to issue commands to it in time to be able to make the corrections to try and do a lunar landing. Anybody in Kerbal, anybody that's played KSP knows exactly what I'm talking about. Can we do it nowadays? Yeah, sure. But computers, do we do unmanned lunar landings all the time nowadays? Like what Intuitive Machines is doing, or Firefly with Blue Ghost, or Astrobotic eventually? Yeah, of course. Even China with the Chang'e 3 and Chang'e 5 rovers, sure, of course. But the computers are on the spacecraft. We're just merely monitoring it. We're not issuing necessarily corrective commands to the flight system on the way down. There is nothing like that existed. So when Apollo came around, the Draper Laboratory basically needed to figure out a way to miniaturize and lighten a computer to put it on the spacecraft so the computer could control the spacecraft in real time. And it would interpret commands that are inputted to it from the pilot. That was the whole idea. That type of systems requirement paved the way for the digital revolution that happened in the 70s and the 80s, and subsequently the internet. The internet is a benefit of defense spending, if you want to be very clear. The internet is a byproduct of the DARPAnet, which was a way for the U.S. to link missile silos to better coordinate a retaliatory strike in a nuclear exchange. That is the precursor of the internet. It's called DARPAnet. But once again, another story. Defense spending has its benefits too. But NASA's drive to make a miniaturized computer to land people on the moon paved the way for technology like this. Remember how I said all the spacecraft that we land on the moon nowadays aren't being controlled, remote control in real time from Earth. That would take a long time for the signal to get there to make a split-second decision on whether you should land there or there. No. All the spacecraft that land on the moon have onboard flight computers that are light enough to be able to move the spacecraft around and get it to land in real time or crash. Sorry, Intuitive Machines. Biodigital jazz, man. So Does spending money on NASA benefit us? Yes. NASA is, and what does NASA do? NASA is there to pioneer technologies that will open up new avenues of commercial development for the United States. That is the whole point. It's soft power projection. We can go to the moon because our system is better. And look at all the technology that we developed that'll make all of our stuff better. The Apollo guidance computer, once again, is a paradigm shift in how spacecraft fly. Every rocket that flies nowadays from every single country, save for maybe a couple of small players in spaceflight, use this system. A miniaturized computer, onboard avionics, batteries, basically the probe core from Kerbal. That's very important to understand. Everyone does that. Russian rockets, if they don't blow up the pad. European rockets have an onboard computer. Everything has an onboard computer. Falcon 9, the space shuttle did. Since then, that everybody's done that. And that technology also found its way into the aerospace sector. Anybody here a fan? And it's not just in the United States. It's frankly, these technological contributions have helped made NASA's AGC technological contributions have helped made airline travel way safer. The Apollo guidance computer was equipped with what's called a fly-by-wire computer, where your flight controls aren't mechanically hooked up to your thrusters or engines or control mechanisms. Your commands are interpolated, they're figured out by a computer, and the computer applies what you're doing with the controls to the mechanical components. That's called electromechanical control. Anybody here a fan of Airbus? Like, do you guys, people play Flight Simulator? You like the A320neo? Guess what that has? Digital fly-by-wire flight control system. Guess who was the first ones to do it? NASA. Every fighter jet nowadays, almost every fighter jet, every new fighter jet that flies from any country uses a fly-by-wire system where a computer is interpolating the flight controls inputted from the pilot. Every single one of them. F-22s, F-35s, J-35s, J-20s, MiGs, Sukhois, they all use this system because it's a better system. Now, that's for weapons, so I'm not really too cool with that, but airplanes do this. Every airplane flying nowadays, save for a Cessna 172 or some small recreational craft, have an onboard flight computer. 737s, A320s, 747s, 787s, 777s, A320s, A330s, A350s, A380s, they all have this. How's that for a technological contribution? Except the old F-14s in Iran. Well, those don't exist anymore, Tessa, so we don't have to worry about that. Digital fly-by-wire has and onboard computer flight control systems and the applications of aerospace is something that was pioneered by NASA. That's part of the reason why I can get on a plane and fly to Europe in 6 hours and get there and not crash into the ocean. Space research, and that's what I mean about NASA being able to push they should be pushing the technological edge, and that's what Jared Isaacman is all about. NASA should be exploring sectors in aerospace and aeronautics, right, that the private sector is not. NASA does aerospace material science. Yeah, that's a good point, Sig. Aerospace material science. What are other things that are invented by NASA that benefit us? So digital flight computers is pretty much at the top of that list. Tang, yeah, Velcro, yeah. There are others. Friction stir welding, if you really want to know. Friction stir welding was just basically an industry standard in the commercial industry. That was pioneered by NASA. Winglets on airplanes to improve fuel economy. Wing design. That was all done by NASA. Swept wings is a German invention. But yeah, the swept wings are a German invention, but NASA really took that to the next level. Heck, even aerodynamic fairings on semi-trucks. Anybody here see us, drive around on the highway? Do you notice how the semi-trucks have fairings on the side and fairings on the wheels for better aerodynamic, for better fuel efficiency? That was pioneered by NASA. NASA figured that out. Grooves on highways, grooves on runways. Yeah, this is what I mean. NASA needs to be pursuing all these endeavors. I ask because I have an experiment that involves human biomechanics for helping prevent issues for long space travel. You'd have to look at the SBIR's outdoorsman or talk to your professors about it. So canards are a NASA invention? No, I don't think so. Winglets are. And I'm talking about the vertical winglets that are on the outside of a plane's wing. The winglets on the outside of a plane's wing are there to prevent air from sliding sideways off of a wing. Because air that slides, so if you have a swept wing like this and you have air coming at it, because the wing is swept, air will inadvertently want to go this way. It'll want to go with the angle, the sweep angle of the wing, right? Pretty straightforward stuff. But you ideally want the air to sweep over the wing like this. Now, if you have a straight wing, that's way easier to do. Air just flows directly over it, right? A swept wing, the air wants to go this way. So having a winglet at the end of your wing, right, prevents the air from sliding sideways off of the wing in a swept wing design. That keeps the air, that creates a little bit of compression at the top of the wing at the very end, but it, for the most part, makes the air travel over the wing like this. They had, NASA pioneered the winglet, but if you look at something like let's take a MiG-15, for instance. The way that they tried to do that up until the point of putting a winglet on the edge of a wing, like basically putting a vertical component right here on the edge of it, was using these things. See those fins on the top of the wings? Those are called wing fences. That was their way of mitigating that problem, because with a swept wing design, it's a little bit more aerodynamic, much better for maneuverability at high speeds. But you have the air sliding off the edge of the wing, and if it slides off the edge of the wing, it's going to create a ton of drag. You're going to get nasty flow separation, particularly off the underside of the wing. And a winglet, a vertical wing component right here on the edge of the wing, fixes that problem. That was a pioneering invention from NASA. That improved fuel economy on airplanes by a significant percentage. And if the fuel economy on a 747 is better, that means airline tickets can be cheaper inadvertently. A lot of planes have this, dudes. Yeah. Wing fences were a thing. If you look at a modern fighter plane, they don't have wing fences. Heck, most modern fighter planes don't have winglets either. That's because there are other ways to, do things. That and fuel efficiency isn't necessarily at the top of the list of needs for a F-22 or an Su-57 or a J-30 or a J-20 or whatever. Fuel efficiency is not the point with those. The point is to blow things up. What I have a hard time understanding is that with the computing power we had on Apollo and the computing power we have today, why is getting to the moon so hard? It's not really a question of computing power, geek. This is my personal opinion. People will disagree with it. That's totally fine. We have to want to. The president has to propose a strategy that Congress can get behind. If Congress doesn't like the president, then we're going to have a big problem. NASA and its soft power projection forces us to work together, even if you disagree, for the betterment of the country. That's the whole point. That was the whole idea. It forces people to come together. And being able to come together and communicate despite disagreeing is a fundamental bedrock of the United States. This whole country was founded on being able to self-govern. That's really important. Even nowadays, I would say that's more important nowadays than, well, I wouldn't say it's more important than revolutionary times 250 years ago, but you get the idea. So it's not a technical problem, it's a social problem. Yes, for the last 50 years, basically, NASA has really not had a president that's willing to champion it like President Kennedy. It has been on the back burner. Because during the Apollo, the entire impetus for getting rid of the Apollo program was that we have problems here to solve on Earth, which I think is a very, very naive thing to say. to sit here and even imply that we can somehow achieve utopia here on Earth is a little bit of a fool's errand, in my opinion. Not because we shouldn't strive to be better. We should always strive to be better, absolutely. But because, look, let's take the Civil War, 1863 to 1865 in the United States. Did we have problems? Yes, we had problems. Those problems caused armed conflict to break out. Are those necessarily problems today? Like the 3/5 compromise was a major thing that contributed to the Civil War. Do we have to worry about something like that today? No. Do we have problems that pertain to that today? Sure. But not the exact same problems. We're always going to have stuff that we need to fix. That's the whole point. There's always going to have stuff that we're always going to have stuff that we can do better. Right? But it forces us to, you have to come together and you have to talk. And that's part of the reason why I like NASA so much, because nobody doesn't want us to shine and go further in space. All right? The problem is the lack of compromise here to do that. You have to come together and we have to go further in space. There's nobody that doesn't want to see NASA to be doing amazing things. At least congressional stakeholders. We should be going further. We need to be a part of it. We got to lead it. The eyes of the world look to us. Look to our representative republic and our experiment in self-governance as a beacon for the free world. That's really important to understand. And I think sometimes we need to be reminded of it. Hey, Yoda. Plus agreed like a $2,000 bolt. 58. I understand what you're saying. It is ridiculous that a bolt costs, like one bolt for an airplane costs $2,000 to make. Two things. Could that price be lower? Yes, absolutely. And that's the whole impetus for what you're saying, absolutely. But it's important to understand that with the government, you're getting total cost involved. Okay? That $2,000 bolt is not worth $2,000. And this is what a lot of, I don't think people understand this. The $2,000, it didn't cost $2,000 to make that stupid thing. Maybe it costs $500, right? $500. But this bolt, this fitting that, let's say, for instance, it goes on an F-22, okay? So it's not just buying the bolt to be made. Okay. The government can pay somebody to make it. Now what do you do with it? Now where does that need to go? So how many bases use F-22s? How many F-22s are there? How many bolts are you buying? Where are they going? How are they getting to where they're going? We have bases with F-22s all over the place. Well, not all over the place, but you get the idea. A better example would be something that's more widespread, like an F-15 or an F-16 or a Black Hawk. That would probably be a good idea. How many U.S. military bases use UH-60s or SH-60s, which have a lot of common parts? The $2,000 bolt unit price has all the logistics for distributing that bolt to everywhere that there is a Black Hawk here and overseas, right? That's incorporated into the cost. That's why it's $2,000, even if it costs $500 to make. The logistics and transport is roped into the unit cost because we operate UH-60s and F-22s and F-35s everywhere. Just because we forward deploy like an F-35 in Europe or in Japan or something doesn't necessarily mean that we don't need to get the spare parts there. F-35s, you know, they have wear items. There's things that wear out on them, just like any other mechanical thing. The $2,000 bolt price in this analogy here is the price of getting that over there, getting that to Japan or to Europe, and having a logistics avenue so we can keep our fleet maintained. Same with Navy ships, same with planes, same with tanks, same with everything. Heck, same with getting the damn Burger King to a forward deployed base. I'm sure you guys, if you guys know anything, like if you guys like military logistics, right? You know exactly what I'm talking about. You've seen the meme of the fact that the U.S. can basically forward deploy a Burger King anywhere on the continent, anywhere in the world in 24 hours. there's a freaking Burger King trailer being slid out of a military transport plane. You can go Google it. It's pretty funny, actually. But that is the unit price. That's why it costs so much money. It's TCI. That's important to understand. Now, does that not mean that there's waste? No, absolutely not. There's waste everywhere. You know? Say a base that's overseas needs 2,000 bolts and we deliver 5,000. What the hell are they going to do with that? That's a waste, right? Now, we have ways of trying to combat this. That's what government accountability and the Investigator General Office is all about. So, you know that it's total cost involved. That's not necessarily all, this bolt that costs $500 to make is $2,000. So that means somebody's pocketing that $1,500. If they are, well, yeah, they should go before a court, in my opinion, right? Like, that's pretty straightforward stuff, but that's not the whole reason. But, yeah. Just to kind of cap this all up, I think Rook will get the nomination, and I think he understands what NASA's founding charter is. NASA needs to be pushing the envelope in aeronautical and aerospace sectors that the commercial market doesn't have. And in that regard, guys, does SLS make more sense? Seriously, think about it. Is there any commercial market for sending people into a rectilinear halo orbit around the moon? Is there any commercial benefits to doing that? Seriously. Contemplate it. There's no market for that. You're never making a return on investment on a super heavy launch vehicle. No one has proven that that is useful, even to this day. Mining HE3 from the lunar surface. Yeah, but would you be willing to invest billions of dollars into that subcooler? Would you be methane? Would you be willing to make a $10 billion risk on developing a launch vehicle to do that? Yes, because NASA will pay for it. That's not a commercial customer, O-Force. Fellas, right there, the point that I'm trying to illustrate is the reason why I say SLS needs to stick around for a little bit. Until there is a redundant system, potentially redundant system. Now, personally, I think NASA should never get rid of it. And I know that sounds stupid, but there's other reasons for that. Now, the commercial market can't frankly duplicate it. If SpaceX wanted to do the Artemis 2 mission themselves in February of 2026, February next year, could they do it? No. The answer is no. Could Blue do it? No. Absolutely not. No one can but NASA. That's why SLS still exists. It's not just government pork, even though that does have a lot to do with it. Sometimes there's a gray area with this stuff. Deer Moon? Yeah, that program is not happening. It was canceled because lack of funds, because they, didn't want to do it anymore. The spin-off technology from the Artemis program is what makes it commercially viable. Sure. Yes, it's going to take a while for SpaceX V3 and the Blue next version, but the writing is on the wall. Yoda, I would argue that it's not. And I'm saying that as somebody wearing a Falcon 9 shirt. I would argue that it's not. There's no guarantees that this is going to work. There's no guarantees that New Glenn 9x4 is going to work. There's no guarantees in this business. You know that. Anybody that knows aerospace. There's never 100% certainty for success, ever. Ask anyone that has anything to do with spaceflight. You can never be 100% sure. And because of that, now, is it a high percentage? Sure. At this particular point in time, December 3rd, 2025, right, in the year of our Jebediah Kerman, Starship and New Glenn seems like they're going to eclipse SLS. But if you asked an Apollo engineer in 1968 where NASA would be in 1980, they would have told you something very different than what would have happened. Right? Am I wrong? The future is not certain, especially with aerospace. I don't trust it until it has redundant capability, dude. The writing seems like it's on the wall, but there's no certainty in this business. You know that. I get it, but it should. I agree. Historically, though, I don't. I agree, you know, like Starship probably isn't going to fail. New Glenn's probably not going to fail. The stakeholders there, Elon and Jeff, have pretty deep pockets. There's enough finances here to see it through, I'm pretty sure. However, like I said, the Apollo program was going to deliver us Mars and Venus in the 70s, and a Mars base in the 80s, and the gas giants in the 90s, and Pluto in the 2000s. Everybody was certain that that's what was going to happen, but it didn't. Every time. So what did happen? We wanted a cheaper way to do it. So NASA pioneered reusable spaceflight technology, which is not something that was commercially viable in the market. One could argue that it's still not to this day. I disagree with that, but you could make that argument if you were well versed in spaceflight that reusability is not profitable, right? It's true. You might not like it, but this is what peak reusability looks like, right? Nothing is certain in this industry, so we ended up using the space shuttle. Was the space shuttle a better solution? No, it was not. We ended up having a 6-year stopgap in space flight from 1975 to 1981. Look what happened at the end of the 2000s. You know, we got rid of Constellation because it was too expensive, which is hilarious. That's really funny. A NASA project being too expensive is really funny to me because NASA is supposed to be pioneering stuff. Controlling it doesn't really make any sense. Now, there are spiraling costs that is, in sunk cost fallacy, do exist to an extent. I would argue that SLS is more of a sunk cost fallacy than Constellation was even at the time. Now, with all that being said, you know, we said, oh, commercial can do it cheaper. Commercial can do it cheaper. Have we recouped the capability that we had in July of 2011 to this day? We have not. And we ended up having a 9-year stopgap with no space flight. No manned space flight endeavors launching from the United States from July of 2011 to May of 2020. Yoda, the point that I'm trying to convey here is that every time somebody says exactly what you're saying, we end up with somehow we end up with something lesser, right? Important to understand. I'd say, yeah, dude, I'd say if Constellation wasn't canceled at this point, like if they didn't cancel Constellation, even at this point in time, we'd still be shooting for the moon. Even with all the delays, we would still be shooting for the moon. At the very least, Ares 1 would be an operable, redundant system to getting astronauts to the ISS, which is kind of important. Yeah, that's kind of important, especially considering current events. There's only one way to get to the ISS right now, as of December 3rd, 2025. The Soyuz launch pad at Baikonur, which is one of 2 ways to get crews to the ISS, is not operable. The other way is Dragon. Dragon is the only way to get people to the ISS at this point in time. Now, that is subject to change in the future. But having one way, putting all your eggs in one basket, is something that NASA learned from the space shuttle. That's not a good idea, because if something goes wrong, then people really get stranded. We haven't recouped the capabilities from 73. That's the exact point I'm trying to make, King. That's the exact point. Every time somebody says, oh, well, this is all but certain, for some reason it ends up not being certain. So, knowing this information, I don't think it's entirely unreasonable in saying that when SpaceX can do, or Blue Origin, or any commercial entity can do exactly what SLS can do right now at this particular point in time, I will not let go of SLS. Absolutely not. Every time we've been like, oh yeah, you're right, we end up getting screwed. Every time. Without failure. There's no time where this worked. If we canceled SLS right now, kiss the moon goodbye. Will SpaceX, if everything goes right with SpaceX and Blue Origin, will we see them eventually get to the moon? Yes. Will it be before China? Probably not. Could be. Possible. I hope it do. It's like quitting a job before you have another one. Correct. Yep. Constellation could have been a great program. I would argue that Constellation is a really good idea. And it's almost 2:00 now, so we got to switch over to play some KSP. I've been doing a lot of research into Constellation's architecture for our career mode save. There are parts of Constellation's architecture that I think are absolutely insane, and probably would not have ended very well. If you look at the Copernicus transfer vehicle and how they plan to set that all up, it is a very, very contrived architecture. Now, Constellation for lunar exploration, real good. Real good. Probably as best as you could do. But when it came to Mars applications, I don't think that would have been. I think that some refactoring of the architecture would have probably been useful. NASA's job is crazy stuff, though. Helpish, my problems aren't really with the stakeholder expectations of Constellation going to Mars. It is more about the ways in which humans would move around and get to the Martian surface during a proposed Mars mission. I like the transfer vehicles. I like Orion as a lifeboat. There are points in a Constellation mission when the transfer vehicle gets to Mars and circularizes where astronauts need to get into the Orion MCPV out of the transfer vehicle, let the transfer vehicle loiter in orbit, right? And then rendezvous with the lander, which is already there in low Mars orbit. So you're doing a crew transfer between two gigantic spaceflight entities. One of them you won't know is okay until you get to it. I'm not sure I like that. That and the cool transfer vehicles, the MTV Copernicus and stuff, are expendable. The nuclear transfer stages, they're expendable in Constellation's architecture, and I'm not too keen on that. I think that's pretty stupid. Artemis 2 is scheduled 2 months from Friday. Do you see anything delaying that? I'd say there's a pretty good chance that it flies sometime in March or April. Geek. Yeah, pretty good chance. So SLS to get boots on the moon before China and Starship New Glenn to build a permanent South Pole base. That is what I would want to do, X-Wing. If I was in charge of NASA with no checks and balances, complete control, I'd go right to Boeing and Northrop Grumman and Lockheed and say I need 40. I'd go to Boeing and say I need 40 SLS core stages. 40. I go to Northrop Grumman, I need 80. I need 80 of these BOLA boosters. And I'd go to Lockheed and be like, yeah, I need 20 Orion capsules. Orion's reusable. And I'd go to the Europeans and I say, we need 40 service modules. And Boeing, we need 40 EUSs. The reason why I would do this is because I think that pretty much puts a definitive, that definitively would make sure that your stopgap to commercial redundancy is non-existent. Now, why 40? 4 flights of SLS over the next 10 years. That would be enough to hedge your bets against commercial or for commercial. Long story short, X-Wing, if everything goes right with Starship and if everything goes right with Blue Moon Mark II and New Glenn 9x4 and New Glenn 7x2 and New Glenn 6x7, I think 10 years would be enough to mature those technologies for NASA to be able to have a off-ramp to using commercial to get to the surface of the moon. And to be honest, even then, I would start, if we were launching SLSs to the tune of 4 launches a year for the next 10 years, in 5 years, I would start looking at applications of SLS and spaceflight architecture to get to Mars. That way, by the time this supposed commercial capability is established in about 10 years, so 2035, right? SpaceX can routinely, and Blue can routinely get people to the moon, you know, best case scenario, right? You can start even then looking at SLS applications for large payload masses to orbit for transfer vehicles, outposts. You can use SLS as a deep space probe launcher. There are even applications, even if Starship is fully redundant, to SLS. SLS would be a great vehicle for launching, for doing scientific research of the outer rim planets. Because not because SLS can launch a bigger payload, but if you put a regular sized, like, scientific satellite, like, I don't know, like, let's take Curiosity and Perseverance. SLS could send like 20 of those to Mars in one shot. No one here could make the argument that more rovers roving around on Mars would be worse for scientific research. If anything, that would provide redundancy. Because if you have 2 rovers roving the Jezero crater instead of 1, you can confirm your scientific findings. Even after SLS is being in the Artemis program is used to establish a lunar base, and even after you hand it over commercial, even when commercial has redundant capability to you, SLS could still be used as a very, very potent one-off bespoke launch vehicle for scientific exploration. That's a really, really good idea. By definition, because it's an expendable vehicle, it has more delta V than Starship. And you can get stuff done more expediently. Right? SLS could be used to launch like 4 or 5 James Webb Space Telescopes. Heck, you could put a James Webb Space Telescope around Mars with SLS. Sure. You could put one around the outer rim planets. You could put one at Pluto if you really wanted to. SLS does have applications, guys. But yeah, 10 years would be my stopgap to make absolutely sure that your commercial systems, your commercial architecture, so Starship, SLD, whatever else comes in the meantime, like Neutron, maybe Peter Beck decides they want to build a capsule or something, or maybe Stoke decides they want to build a capsule, or Relativity, or whatever. You know, 10 years and constant launching would be enough time to A, beat China to the moon, and B, hedge your bets for commercial to make sure that they have redundant capabilities, so you can either A, off-ramp and retire SLS, or B, use it for other applications. Nocturlux, what's up, dude? I do not see your lasts. Is it tagged? I don't see it. I mean, isn't that sort of what Spirit and Opportunity were meant for? Yep. SLS also can have a higher C3. Yes. Because of an expendable launch, because it's expendable, Deadbringer, you have a very unique capability with characteristic energy. This thing, by definition, because it's expendable, it could yeet probes anywhere. Like the Psyche mission, for instance. Psyche's in the Lucy mission. Those missions are going to take years to get out to the Trojans. It's going to take years, and they have to do multiple gravity assists. You could get Psyche out there in a year with SLS. It's that big of a difference. Oh, yeah, ZK3. Yeah, they botched the landing burn. It looked like a hard start during landing, which kind of sucks, but yeah, great. Good for them. Yeah. Good stuff. Cool shirt. Thanks, Admika. Good points, and also scaling production equals better revenue from the development phase. That's right, Roxic. You got it. SLS has cost us $93 billion, but it is operational. It does work. The stupidest thing to do right now would be to get rid of it. I'm serious. Remember, NASA needs to be pioneering the frontier of spaceflight in applications of manned spaceflight, something that commercial will probably get to in the future, but definitely won't get to in the next year or so, next 2 years, next 3 years. No way. What is the inventory of RS-25s? The inventory is expanding because L3 Harris has a contract to, they had a contract to restart production of the RS-25 program and start producing new variants called the RS-25E. They're being tested at Stennis right now, actually. So they're working on recouping our RS-25 supply for future SLS missions. I do believe we have RS-25 rockets procured out to Artemis 9, if I'm remembering correctly. Zuke 3 hit the target, just a little bit too fast. Yep. Isn't that what Bridenstine did? Jim did everything short of a block buy. I think he was going to if the current incumbent president had won re-election at the time. I think that's what he was trying to pivot to doing. But yeah, the political winds changed and NASA's plans changed. Anyway, I've done a lot of talking. You guys want to play some KSP? For what it's worth, dudes, I think Rook is I think he's gonna get confirmed. I would be very surprised if he didn't. And I think Jared Isaacman understands fundamentally what NASA's goals should be. And I really hope he, through his poise and articulativeness, if that's a word, I think he'll be able to get it done. He knows how to talk to people. And that, guys, it is a political science endeavor when you're a NASA administrator. You have to be able to be fluent in politics. And I think he's a very good orator, and I think he'll be very good at doing that, especially from what I've seen from these Senate confirmation meetings. Anyway, speaking of which, we have a mission to Minmus that we need to work on for KSP. So I'm going to pivot us over to that. Fellas, we're probably going to... This is basically the space news segment here now. Unless some crazy new news comes out in the next couple of hours, we're probably playing KSP all the way to after hours, okay? Kalshi agrees on Jared Isaacman's chances. Sean Duffy has a 5% chance of being nominated. All right. Burbs. Anyway, I am going to stop the YouTube stream so we get better VOD continuity over there, but the Twitch stream will continue. Stand by for a momentary loss of signal. We'll be back for KSP here in a moment. We got some work to do. I had a botched lander launch last night, so we got to come up with some architecture to save our lander and get people out to Minmus. I'll let you know more about it in a second. Anyway, thank you for watching the confirmation. We did not rage. I see this as an absolute win. I didn't let it piss me off. Now, if only I could do that with Battlefield. That would be very useful. Let's play some Kerbal. I'll be back in a sec. Okay, it's just me and you guys, Twitch. I'm just gonna sit here and change up the titles. Okay, so Minmus landing and Minmus lander rescue and crewed landing. KSB